The cold hit Alara Cole the moment she stepped off the bus. It was not the kind of cold that came from the weather. The sky above the mountain town of Greyvale was pale and gray, yes, and the wind moved through the narrow road like it had somewhere important to be. But the cold Alara felt was something else. It was the kind that settles in your chest when you know, without being told, that you have walked into a place that does not welcome strangers. She stood at the edge of the road with one bag over her shoulder and a folded piece of paper in her hand. The address on that paper led to a house called Blackwood Manor. She had found the job posting 3 weeks ago on a small local notice board outside a grocery store. Housekeeper needed. Live-in position. Good pay. References not required. She had stared at it for a long time before tearing off the number at the bottom. She had no references. She had no savings. She had nothing left of the life she had tried to build before it fell apart, and the only thing standing between her and a second night sleeping at the bus station was the phone call she had made the following morning. A woman named Helen had answered. She had not asked many questions. She had only said that the position was available, the house was large, the work was hard, and the pay came on time every week. Alara had said yes before the woman finished the sentence. Now she was here, and the paper in her hand told her to follow the main road north until it curved, then take the gravel path on the left between 2 large stone pillars. She folded the paper and started walking. The gravel path was longer than it looked. Trees lined both sides, old ones with thick trunks and branches that reached across the path and touched above her head like hands clasped in prayer. Through the gaps in the trees, she could see fields that stretched into the distance, and beyond them, the dark shape of a forest that looked like it had been standing since before anyone could remember. The whole place was very quiet, no birds, no wind through the branches, just the sound of her shoes on the gravel and the low hum of her own breathing. When the house appeared, it appeared all at once. One moment there were trees, then the path curved, and there it was. Blackwood Manor was very large. That was the first thing she thought. The second thing she thought was that it looked like it had been built by someone who was not afraid of anything. It rose 3 stories above the ground, made from dark stone that looked almost black in the flat October light. The windows were tall and narrow, and the front door was heavy dark wood set into a stone arch. The gardens in front were neat and trimmed, but there was nothing soft about them. No flowers, only shaped hedges and gravel, and a stone fountain that was not running. She stopped at the bottom of the front steps and looked up. A woman appeared at the door before Alara had a chance to knock. She was somewhere in her late 50s, with iron gray hair pinned tightly at the back of her head, and eyes that were quick and careful. She wore a dark blue dress and flat shoes, and she looked at Alara the way a person looks at a new tool they are not yet sure will work properly. "You must be Alara Cole," the woman said. "Yes," Alara said. "I am Helen Marsh. Head housekeeper, come inside." There was no handshake, no smile. Helen simply turned and walked back through the door, and Alara followed. The inside of the manor was warmer than she had expected, but it was not a comfortable warmth. It was the warmth of a place that was properly heated and well maintained, but that had not been truly lived in for a long time. The entrance hall was wide, with a stone floor and dark wood panels on the walls. A wide staircase rose from the center of the hall to a landing above, and from that landing, the staircase split left and right. There were no photographs on the walls, no personal items of any kind, only a large painting above the fireplace that showed a forest at night, all dark trees and gray sky. "The house has 12 rooms in regular use," Helen said, already moving toward a corridor on the right. "The east wing is off limits. You do not go there unless I specifically assign you there, and I will not be assigning you there. Understood?" "Understood," Alara said. "You will share the staff kitchen with 2 others. Owen handles the grounds. Lily handles the laundry. You will handle the main house, the hall, the sitting rooms, the dining room, the library, and the guest corridors. The owner's rooms are cleaned by me and me alone. You will not go into the east wing." She said it twice. Alara noted that. "When do I start?" Alara asked. "In the morning. Tonight you rest. Your room is on the 3rd floor of the staff wing." Helen stopped at a door at the end of the corridor and opened it. Inside was a small room with a single bed, a wardrobe, a window that looked out toward the back garden, and a small desk. It was plain and clean. To Alara, it looked like the most welcoming room she had seen in months. "Meals are at 7 in the morning, and 6 in the evening in the staff kitchen. Helen said, "Do not be late. The house runs on time." She left without saying good night. Elara sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the room around her. The sheets were clean. The window latch was solid. The floor did not creak when she shifted her weight. She put her bag down and lay back and looked at the ceiling. She told herself it was only for a little while, just long enough to save some money and figure out what came next. She was good at telling herself that. She had been saying it for 2 years. She was asleep before she finished the thought. She met Owen and Lily the next morning at 5 minutes to 7. Owen was a quiet man in his 40s, with rough hands and very little to say. He nodded at her when she sat down and went back to his tea. Lily was younger, perhaps 23, with pale skin and a habit of tucking her hair behind both ears at the same time when she was thinking. She looked at Elara with open curiosity and smiled right away. "You're the new one," Lily said. "I am," Elara said. "How did you find the house?" "I walked." Lily blinked. "From the road?" "That's 20 minutes." "I know." Lily smiled again. "You'll be fine here," she said, like it was a conclusion she had just reached. "As long as you follow Helen's rules. There are a lot of them, but they are not hard to remember. The main one is the East Wing." "She mentioned that," Elara said. "She mentions it to everyone," Lily said. "I've been here 2 years, and I still haven't been past that door." She said it the way someone says a thing they have made their peace with. Elara ate her toast and asked no more questions. The first week was hard, the way all new jobs are hard when you are trying to learn a house and its rhythms at the same time. Blackwood Manor had its own way of breathing. There were rooms that felt heavier in the afternoon than in the morning. There were corridors where the air changed temperature for no reason she could find. There were doors that were always closed, not locked, just always closed, and she learned quickly to leave them that way. She saw the owner for the first time on her 4th day. She had not been told his name. Helen referred to him only as the Alpha, which Elara had assumed was a title of some kind, or perhaps a nickname the staff had given him. She had not asked. She had learned that in houses like this, some questions were better left for later. She was carrying a stack of folded linen down the main staircase when she heard footsteps above her. She stopped on the landing and looked up. He was at the top of the staircase, and he was not moving. He was tall, not just tall in the ordinary way, but tall in the way that fills a space and makes the air around it feel smaller. He was broad through the shoulders, with dark hair and a face that was sharp and still, and showed nothing at all. He was wearing dark clothes, and his hands were at his sides, and he was looking at something past her, somewhere down the hall, like she was not there. Then he looked at her. It lasted only a second. His eyes dropped to her on the landing, registered her, and moved away. He turned and walked back down the upper corridor without a word or a sound, and then he was gone. Elara stood there for a moment with the stack of linen in her arms. Something about that second had felt strange, not frightening, not unkind, just strange. Like the air between them had shifted very slightly, in a way she could not name, and had no word for. She shook it off and went back to work. That evening at dinner, she asked Lily about him. "What is his name?" she said. Lily looked up from her plate. "Damien Blackwood," she said. "He owns the house and the land, and most of the mountain beyond it. He also runs a company, though I'm not entirely sure what it does. Helen handles everything he doesn't handle himself, which is most of the day-to-day." "Is he always here?" Elara asked. "Almost always. He leaves sometimes. Business, I think. But he doesn't go far." Lily picked up her fork. "He doesn't say much. I've been here 2 years, and I have heard him speak maybe 8 times. Does he have family?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "He had a wife," she said. "She died 5 years ago. I don't know how. No one talks about it." She looked at Owen, who was reading a folded newspaper, and gave no sign of having heard any of this. After that, he closed most of the house off. The East Wing used to be open. Now it isn't. Elara looked at her plate. "That's sad," she said. "Yes," Lily agreed. "It is." They did not talk about it again that night. Elara threw herself into the work. She was good at it. She had always been good at tasks that had a clear start and a clear end, at rooms that needed order, and routines that needed following. She scrubbed floors and cleaned windows, and polished the long wooden table in the dining room until she could see her reflection in it. She dusted the shelves in the library, which had so many books. She spent 3 days doing it properly, and still felt she had missed some corners. The library was her favorite room. It was at the back of the house on the ground floor, with tall windows that looked out into the back garden, and shelves that went from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. There was a large fireplace that Helen kept ready to be lit, and 2 armchairs near it, and a reading lamp between them. The books were not organized in any way she could identify. They seemed to have been arranged by the preferences of the person who owned them, which meant they jumped from subject to subject with no pattern she could find. History, beside astronomy, beside old novels, beside books on animal behavior and wilderness tracking. She lingered in the library when she could, and always left it exactly as she found it. At the end of her first week, she saw him again. She was finishing in the dining room when she heard footsteps in the hall. She straightened and turned, expecting Helen. But it was Damien Blackwood who passed the open doorway, walking quickly, head down, a jacket over one arm and a folder of papers in his hand. He did not look into the dining room. He did not slow his pace. But something made him stop just past the doorway. She saw it from the corner of her eye. He stopped, and there was a half-second of stillness, and then he walked on without looking back. Alara turned back to the table and picked up her cloth. She told herself it was nothing. People stop walking all the time. They remember something they forgot, or they adjust what they are carrying, or they hear a sound. It meant nothing. But that strange thing in the air was there again, that small, quiet shift, like something very large holding its breath. She kept her head down and kept working, and told herself it was only the house. Old houses were full of strange feelings. It was the stone, and the silence, and the way sound moved differently in very large rooms. She believed herself almost completely. Almost. By the end of the second week, she had found her rhythm. She rose before 6, dressed, was in the staff kitchen by 7, and was at work in the house by 8. She worked until midday, broke for lunch, and worked again until 4. Helen checked her work each afternoon without comment, which Alara had learned to interpret as approval. When Helen found something to criticize, she said so directly, and without softness, which Alara actually preferred to false praise. The rest of the people in the house kept to their own business. She saw Damien Blackwood most often at a distance, walking through the hall, standing at a window at the end of a corridor, getting into a dark car at the front of the house in the early morning, on days when he had to leave. He never spoke to her. He never looked at her directly for more than a moment. But she was aware of him, in the way you are aware of something large and quiet and close, not because it is making noise, but because the air around it is different from the air everywhere else. She did not dwell on it. She had come here to work and to save money, and to build something small and steady, and that was what she was going to do. She had not come here to notice the man who owned the house. She had not come here to feel anything at all. On the last night of her second week, she sat at the little desk in her room and wrote a number in a small notebook. It was the amount she had saved since arriving. It was not much, but it was more than she had arrived with, and it was entirely hers, and she looked at it for a moment before closing the notebook and going to bed. Outside, somewhere in the forest beyond the garden wall, something howled once and then was quiet. She lay still and listened for it again. It did not come again. She told herself it was a dog, or the wind through a gap in the stone, or any of the ordinary things that make sound at night in old places near old forests. She closed her eyes. She did not think about the way the air had shifted when he passed the doorway. She did not think about the stillness in the hall when he stopped. She did not think about any of it. She slept. And on the other side of the manor, in the east wing that no one entered, a man stood at his window in the dark and looked out at the garden below and did not sleep at all. The third week changed things. Alara did not know it was changing things. That was the nature of it. Change in a house like Blackwood Manor did not announce itself. It moved quietly through the corridors the way the cold did, through gaps you could not find and places you had not thought to check. It began on a Monday morning. Helen came to her at breakfast and told her that Lily had a cold and would be in her room for a few days, and that Alara would need to cover the upper guest corridor on the second floor, in addition to her usual work. Alara said she could manage it, and meant it. Helen gave her the list of rooms and went back to her tea. The upper guest corridor was not difficult. The rooms were not used, which meant they were already clean. She only needed to air them, check for dust, and make sure the windows were latched. It took her less than an hour. When she came down the back stairs at the end of it, she was thinking about the library windows she still needed to polish, and whether she had time before lunch. She was not thinking about the man who had appeared at the top of the main staircase, and was now standing perfectly still in the doorway of the sitting room, watching her cross the hall. She saw him when she was halfway across. She stopped. He did not look away. It was different from the other times. The other times had been brief, accidental, a second at most before one of them moved. This was longer. He was standing with one hand on the doorframe and the other at his side, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not read at all. Not cold, not warm. Completely still, like a thing that was trying very hard not to move. She did not know what to do. She was not the kind of person who looked away first, but she was also aware that he was the man who owned the house, and she was the woman who cleaned it, and she was not sure what the rules were in a moment like this. She nodded. It was the only thing she could think to do. A small, polite acknowledgement of his presence, the kind of thing you give a person in a hallway when you are not sure if they want to speak. He did not nod back. He looked at her for another moment, and then he turned and walked into the sitting room and closed the door behind him. Ilara stood in the middle of the hall for a count of 3, and then walked to the library and started on the windows, and told herself that meant absolutely nothing. It meant nothing the next day either, when she was dusting the corridor outside the dining room and heard his footsteps coming from the direction of the study. She did not stop working. She kept her head down and moved her cloth along the shelf in front of her, and when his footsteps brought him to the same stretch of corridor she was standing in, she stepped to one side to give him room. He stopped. She looked up. He was closer than she had expected. He was standing perhaps 4 feet away from her, looking at the shelf she had been dusting. Then he reached past her and picked up a book from the shelf. A small dark blue volume she had dusted around carefully because it looked old. He looked at it for a moment, and she caught the faintest movement along his jaw, like he was about to say something, and had thought better of it. Then he turned and walked away with the book under his arm. She turned back to the shelf. Her heart was doing something unnecessary, and she was not going to think about it. She was not going to think about the fact that when he had reached past her, she had been close enough to see the way his jaw moved. She was not going to think about the way the air had changed again. The air always changed around him. It was probably just the house. Large old houses did strange things to the air. She moved to the next shelf and kept working. Lily came back from her room on Thursday, still sniffling but cheerful, and immediately wanted to know how Ilara had managed. "Fine," Ilara said. "It wasn't much extra work." "Did you see him much?" Lily asked, pulling her hair behind both ears. "A couple of times," Ilara said. Lily looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise. "He doesn't usually come out of the study much," she said. "Or the East Wing. Helen says he used to be more visible when his wife was alive." Ilara handed Lily a cup of tea and said nothing. "He looked at me once," Lily said. "My first week here. Just once, very briefly. The woman I replaced told me afterward that she had worked here 2 years, and he never once looked at her at all. She said it without drama, just as a fact she had filed away. He doesn't look at people. He looks at papers and books and out of windows." Ilara wrapped her hands around her own mug. "Maybe he's just private," she said. "Maybe," Lily agreed. There was a pause. Then Lily said, "Did anything strange happen while I was in my room?" Ilara thought about the hall, the sitting room doorway, the corridor and the book. "No," she said, "nothing strange." On Friday, she went back to the upper guest corridor to finish a job she had left half done on Monday. She had a small cart with her cleaning supplies, and she worked through the rooms one by one. The third room from the end had a large window that was difficult to open, and she spent 10 minutes persuading it before it finally gave way and let the cold autumn air in. She was reaching for her cloth when she heard something. It was not footsteps. It was lower than that. A sound under sound, like something that was not quite a voice and not quite anything else. It came from behind the wall to her left, which meant it was coming from the east wing on the other side. She stood still. The sound came again. She could not make out words. She could not make out meaning. She could only hear it, low and deep and very controlled, like someone who was used to keeping their voice inside a very small space. She did not move toward the wall. She was not that kind of person. She had not come here to pry. But she stood still for a moment longer than she needed to, and she listened to the low sound on the other side of the wall, and she thought about what Lily had said about the East Wing, about how it had been open once, about what had changed it. Then she went back to work. That afternoon, Owen came to find her in the library. He was carrying a box of firewood, and he set it beside the hearth, without being asked, and while he was stacking it, he said, without looking at her, "You should know there will be guests this weekend." "Helen didn't mention it," Elara said. "Helen doesn't always mention things," Owen said. "There will be 12 people arriving Saturday evening. They will stay through Sunday. They use the main dining room and the sitting room and 2 of the guest rooms you've been cleaning." He picked up the box and turned to go. Then he stopped and looked at her with those steady eyes of his. "When there are guests, do not go to the main hall after 7 in the evening. Go to your room and stay there. Helen will tell you the same thing." "Is there a reason?" Elara asked. He considered her for a moment. "The guests are particular," he said. "They prefer privacy. All questions about the house and the guests go to Helen." He left. Elara stood with a book in her hand and thought about what he had not said. She was not a person who panicked at things she did not understand. She had grown up learning that some people had rules that seemed strange from the outside and made complete sense from the inside, and that you did not have to understand a rule to follow it if the rule was not hurting you. No East Wing, no main hall after 7 on guest weekends. Fine, she could work with that. She put the book back on its shelf and finished her work. The guests arrived on Saturday, as Owen had said. Elara heard the cars on the gravel drive from her room on the 3rd floor. She did not look out her window. She changed into her comfortable clothes and sat at her desk with a book of her own and listened to the distant sounds of voices in the hall below. Low, brief, not the sound of ordinary conversation. She heard Helen's voice once, directing something. She heard footsteps on the main staircase. And then the sounds settled into the walls of the house the way sounds do when people have moved to a room you cannot hear from, and everything was quiet again. She read her book for 2 hours and went to bed. Sunday passed quietly. She did not go to the main hall. She helped Lily with the laundry, and helped Owen carry the ash from the fireplace in the east corridor, which confused her briefly, because if the East Wing was off limits, why was the fireplace ash being removed? She asked Owen. He said it was Helen's business. She dropped the subject. When the guests left Sunday evening, she watched from her window. The cars moved down the gravel path in a line of 4. She could not see the people inside them clearly, but from the way they carried themselves, the way even their silhouettes in the fading light seemed to hold a particular kind of weight, she had the feeling they were not ordinary guests attending an ordinary weekend. She could not have said why she felt that, only that she did. Later, when the house was quiet, and the staff kitchen was empty, and Lily and Owen had gone to bed, Elara came downstairs to make herself a cup of tea, and found him in the kitchen doorway. Damien Blackwood was standing in the doorway with a glass in his hand, and for the second time in her life, they were close enough to each other for it to matter. She stopped on the last step. He looked at her. The kitchen light was on. It made everything sharp and ordinary and real. He did not move from the doorway. She did not move from the step. The silence between them was not hostile and not comfortable. It was simply there, like the kitchen and the light and the glass in his hand. She said, "I was going to make tea." He said nothing, but he moved. He stepped back, not all the way into the kitchen, but enough that she could pass through the doorway without getting closer to him than a foot of space. She went to the kettle and filled it without looking at him. She heard him set the glass down on the counter behind her. She heard him stay. She turned the kettle on and waited for it to boil, and told herself to breathe normally. "How long have you been here?" he said. His voice was lower than she had imagined it would be, and steadier, and it took her a moment to be sure the question had been aimed at her. She looked over her shoulder. He was leaning against the counter with his arms folded, looking at the floor, not at her. 3 weeks, she said. He nodded once, as if confirming something. The kettle began to boil. She poured her tea. She was very careful with the kettle. "The work is acceptable?" he said. "I think so," she said. Helen hasn't complained. Something shifted in the line of his mouth, not quite a smile, only the shadow of one. "Helen never complains," he said. "She corrects," Elara said. "Yes," he said, "she does." The kettle finished, and the kitchen went quiet again, and she wrapped both hands around her mug and turned to face him properly, because it felt strange to keep her back to someone who was talking to her. He was looking at her now, directly, without the brief accidental quality of all the other times. He was looking at her the way a person looks at something they are still deciding about. She met his gaze. She was not the kind of person who looked away. After a moment he said, "Good night, Miss Cole." He took his glass and walked out of the kitchen without making a sound, and she stood in the kitchen alone with her tea and a heartbeat that was doing something she had no useful name for. She stood there until it stopped. Then she turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs and sat on her bed and looked at the ceiling. 3 weeks. She had been here 3 weeks. She was supposed to be saving money and being sensible and keeping her head down. She was not supposed to be sitting on her bed at 10:30 at night thinking about the way a man had said her name in a kitchen doorway. She lay down. She pulled the blanket over herself. Outside, the forest was quiet, not a single sound. She fell asleep with her hands folded on top of the blanket and her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and she told herself, firmly and clearly, that nothing was beginning. She was almost convincing. 14 days later, everything changed. Not loudly, not with any warning that she could have pointed to afterward and said, "There, that was the moment." It came the way real change comes, in the space between one ordinary thing and the next, when you are not watching for it. It was a Tuesday. The sky outside was low and gray, and the kind of cold that made the stone walls of the manor feel twice as thick. Elara had been at work since 8, and by mid-morning, she had finished the dining room, the main corridor, and 2 of the smaller sitting rooms on the ground floor. Helen had come to her after breakfast with a revision to her usual schedule. "The linen room adjacent to the east corridor needs to be restocked," Helen said. "The shelves on the left side. The supply cart is in the ground floor cupboard. You know where the fresh linen is?" Elara nodded. "Is that near the east wing?" she asked. "It is adjacent to it," Helen said. "Not in it. There is a clear boundary. The linen room door is on the south side of the hall. You go in, you stock the shelves on the left, and you come out. You do not open any door but the linen room door." "Understood," Elara said. She collected the cart and the supplies and made her way to the east corridor at 11:15. The hall that separated the main house from the east wing was not as dramatic as she had built it up to be in her mind. It was simply a corridor, slightly narrower than the others, with a door at the far end that was very solidly shut, and the linen room door on the south side halfway along. She unlocked the linen room with the key Helen had given her and went inside. It was a good-sized room, wide enough for the cart, with long shelves on both sides and a high ceiling. A single lamp mounted on the wall cast steady yellow light. The left shelves were indeed low. She could see the gaps where stock had been used up over the weeks. She began loading from the cart, working efficiently, setting things in place. She was on her 3rd trip from the cart to the shelf when she heard footsteps in the hall outside. She assumed it was Helen. She did not look up. The footsteps stopped outside the linen room door, but the door did not open. There was a pause, a long one, long enough that she noticed it, and then the footsteps moved on down the hall toward the far door. She heard the far door open and close. She kept working. She was almost done with the second shelf when she realized she had put a stack of hand towels on the wrong side. She moved to correct it, and in doing so, stepped back against the small alcove at the rear of the room, a shallow recess built into the wall where extra folded blankets were stored. She had not noticed it earlier because the cart had been blocking it. She set down what she was carrying and reached into the alcove for the stack that needed moving. That was when she heard the footsteps again, coming back. They were fast this time. Not running, but quick, with purpose, and she heard the door at the end of the hall open, and then the footsteps in the hall again, much closer, and then the linen room door swung open. She had half turned, her arms full of folded blankets, completely unprepared. Damien Blackwood walked through the door. He was looking at something in his hand, a piece of paper, or a document, something he had been reading as he moved, and he did not look up immediately. He was still in the act of entering the room, still mid-step, and for 1 second, the two of them existed in entirely different moments. Then he looked up. Everything stopped. Not the house, not the clock somewhere in the corridor behind him, not the sound of the wind against the stone walls outside. Those things all kept going. But something in the room, something between the two of them, went completely still, in a way that she felt in her chest, like the silence after a very loud sound. He was not moving. She was not moving. The blankets were still in her arms, and she was standing in the alcove, and they were perhaps 5 feet apart, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the careful blankness she had come to recognize. Not the controlled distance. Something else. Something that looked, in the very brief moment before he shut it away, like a man who had been struck by something he did not understand and could not defend against. His hand gripped the door frame. She saw his jaw tighten. She saw the line of his throat move as he swallowed, once, and hard. Then the blankness returned. Fast. Like a shutter closing over a window. He said nothing. He stepped back out of the doorway. He pulled the door closed behind him. His footsteps went down the hall, fast and even, and then they were gone. Alara stood in the linen room, with her arms full of blankets, and her heart going very fast, and the lamplight perfectly steady above her, and the room completely quiet. She stood there for a full minute. Then she set the blankets down on the shelf, and finished her work with careful, precise movements, and she went back to the main house with the cart, and returned the cart to the ground floor cupboard, and washed her hands at the staff sink. She said nothing to anyone. At dinner that evening, Lily talked about a program she had watched on her phone, and Owen said 3 words and ate his food, and Alara sat with her cup of tea, and nodded in the right places, and contributed nothing. After dinner she went to her room and sat on the bed and thought about the expression on his face. Not the blankness that came after, the thing that was there before the blankness, the thing she had seen for just long enough to know that she had seen it. She was 24 years old, and she had not been unworldly enough for a very long time. She understood what it meant when a man looked at a woman that way. She had seen it before, though never quite like that. Never with that particular quality. That sharp, involuntary, total quality. Like something had happened to him that he had not chosen. She pulled her knees up to her chest, and stared at the wall. She was the maid. He was the man who owned the house. Those were facts that did not change no matter what expression passed across someone's face in an unguarded second. And yet. She sat with the "and yet" for a long time. She did not come to any conclusions. She was not sure there were conclusions to come to. She only sat with it, the way you sit with something that is too large to look at directly, catching it from the side of your eye. Outside, the forest was very quiet. And inside the east wing, a man stood at his window and gripped the windowsill with both hands and breathed. His wolf did not have the decency to be silent. It had been quiet for 5 years. 5 years of silence that he had mistaken for peace, because peace was the only other thing that silence could mean, and he had not been willing to consider any other option. He had built the silence carefully, like a wall, stone by stone, every day. He had not allowed exceptions. He had not allowed close contact. He had structured his life to make both of those things very easy. And then she had turned, with the blankets in her arms and the lamplight on her face, and his wolf had spoken for the first time in 5 years, and said one word. Mine. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the window. He was not going to do this. He was not going to make this into anything. She was here to work. She was doing her job. He had walked into a room he had no reason to enter, and he had startled her, and it was over. It was a brief, unfortunate moment. It meant nothing. His wolf said mine again, louder, as if hearing him argue was amusing. He had spent 5 years not feeling anything that mattered. He was not going to start now because of a woman in a linen room. He stepped back from the window. He picked up the document he had dropped on the floor near the door. He sat at his desk and opened it, and looked at the words, and did not read a single one of them. He sat like that for a long time. The days that followed were not the same. Alara knew it. She felt it, in every part of the house she moved through. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, the way a current runs beneath still water. The house had a certain feeling before that Tuesday, a feeling of a place that was large and quiet and self-contained, where people went about their work and stayed in their lanes and did not expect anything to happen that had not already been scheduled. That feeling was still there. The floors were still cold under her feet in the morning. The library still smelled like paper and old wood, and the very faint trace of smoke from the fireplace. Helen still appeared at 7 sharp with instructions for the day. Owen still carried things and said very little and ate his meals with total focus. Lily still talked cheerfully and wanted to know things, and made the staff kitchen feel like a place where people actually lived. None of that had changed. What had changed was him. Elara noticed it the morning after the linen room. She was in the main hall on her way to the dining room, and she heard his footsteps on the upper landing and looked up out of habit. He was at the railing, looking down, not at the hall, at her. When she looked up, he did not look away. That was new. Every time before, the moment she met his gaze, the moment resolved itself. He would look elsewhere, or move, or the encounter would end the way brief encounters do, without comment and without staying. This time, he held it, not aggressively, not with any intention she could name. He simply looked back at her the way she was looking at him, for 2 full seconds, and then he straightened and walked away from the railing. She watched him go. She went to the dining room and began her work, and made absolutely nothing of it. By Wednesday she had started counting. She was not counting deliberately. She simply became aware, around the middle of the afternoon, that she had been in the same general part of the house as him 4 times that day. In a house this large, with this many corridors and rooms, that was not an accident. Thursday she counted again, 3 times. Each time in a different part of the house. Each time he was doing something that looked entirely plausible. Reading, carrying something, coming from or going to somewhere. Each time she was aware of it 2 or 3 seconds before she saw him, the way you are aware of a shift in light before you look at the window. She was not sure what to do with this information. She could not confront him about it. That was not a conversation she could begin. "Excuse me, are you following me around your own house?" It was his house. He could be in any room he wanted, at any time, for any reason. She had no ground to stand on. She could go to Helen, but Helen would ask why she thought it was a problem, and she would not be able to explain it in a way that sounded like a real concern. She could do nothing. She chose to do nothing. She kept to her routine, and she did her work well, and she was polite when their paths crossed, which they crossed often now, and she told herself it was only a house that was not as large as she had initially believed. On Friday, something happened that she had no reasonable explanation for. She was in the corridor outside the small sitting room on the east side of the ground floor, not the east wing, just the east side, which was perfectly normal to her at this point, and she heard a voice she did not recognize. Not Lily, not Owen, not Helen. A male voice, low and impatient, coming from inside the sitting room. She was not eavesdropping. She had no interest in what was happening inside the sitting room. She was walking past. But she heard the voice say, quite clearly, "She's just a maid, Damien." What does it matter? She stopped. Not because she knew they were talking about her. She did not know that. She stopped because the sharpness in the other voice, the response she heard a second later, cut through the wall with a clarity that had nothing to do with volume. Damien Blackwood's voice said, "That will be all, Kane." It was 4 words. That will be all. She had heard people say those words in a dozen different tones. Dismissive, polite, exhausted, distracted. She had never heard them said the way he said them. It was not anger. It was something past anger. It was the voice of a person who has ended a subject permanently and will not be returning to it. A moment later the door opened, and a man she had not seen before came out of the sitting room and walked down the corridor in the opposite direction without looking at her. He was large, with close-cropped dark hair, and a build like someone who spent significant time being physical, and his face was set in an expression that was not angry, but was absolutely not comfortable. He walked past her, and did not acknowledge her, and his footsteps faded quickly down the hall. The sitting room was quiet. She stood in the corridor for 1 more second. Then she walked on. At dinner, Lily leaned across the table and said, quietly, as if she had been holding it all day, "Did you see the man who came today? Dark hair, big build? Kane Wheeler? He's something like Mr. Blackwood's second in command. Of the company, I mean. Or something like that. Helen gets very still when he visits, and Owen goes somewhere outside." She tucked both pieces of her hair back. "I don't know what they talked about, but he left looking like he'd lost an argument." "I didn't see him," Elara said, which was almost true. Lily nodded. "Well, these things happen." She looked at her food. "He comes sometimes to tell Mr. Blackwood things he doesn't want to hear. At least, that's what I think. Owen says they've known each other a long time, and that real loyalty is the kind where you say the hard things. Owen said that? Ilara asked. Lily smiled. He said it one word at a time over 3 days. But yes. Ilara smiled too. It came easily, which was a thing she had started to notice about her face. It had not been easy to smile for a very long time before she came here. She had not thought about why. She thought about it now, briefly, and then chose not to follow the thought anywhere it might lead. She finished her dinner and said goodnight and went to her room. She did not think about the sitting room. She did not think about the voice that had cut through the wall. She read for an hour and turned out her light and lay in the quiet of the 3rd floor and told herself everything was fine. Saturday morning she was in the library by 8, doing her weekly deep clean of the shelves. The library was a long process, and she had learned to start early and be methodical. She worked from left to right, from top to bottom, lifting each book, dusting the shelf, replacing the book exactly as she had found it. She did not rearrange anything. She had learned very early that in houses where people had strong private lives, the arrangement of their things was not a small matter. She was at the midpoint of the 2nd wall of shelves, the east-facing wall, the longest one, the one with the oldest books, when she heard the door. She did not turn around immediately. She assumed it was Lily, who sometimes brought her tea around mid-morning. "The books in that section are chronological," said a voice that was not Lily. She turned. Damian Blackwood was standing just inside the door. He had a cup of something in his hand, coffee, from the smell that reached her, and he was looking at the shelf she was working on. "Chronological by the date they were acquired," he said, "not by publication date." She looked at the shelf. The books did not look chronological. She looked back at him. "How do you tell?" she asked. He walked forward, not toward her directly, but toward the shelf, and he pointed at the lower right corner of each book's spine. "There is a small penciled number inside the back cover," he said. "Each one. I started marking them when I was 17. She looked at the shelf. "These are that old?" "Some are older," he said. "Those ones were already here when I was born. They have numbers too, but not in my hand." She looked at the row of books. The quiet of the library was different with him in it, but it was not bad different. It was the kind of different that comes from the presence of someone who fits a space, the way some people walk into a room and you feel the room get smaller, and some people walk into a room and you feel it get larger. She was not going to think about that. "Is there a book you recommend?" she asked. She was not sure why she asked it. It was not a professional question. It was a real one, and it came out before she made the decision to say it. He looked at the shelf for a long moment. He reached up without hesitation and pulled out a book from the 3rd shelf. It was thin, with a dark green cover and gold lettering that had faded. He held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers did not touch. She noted that she noticed that they did not touch. "You can read it while you work," he said, "as long as it goes back on the shelf where it came from." "I would not have moved it," she said. "I know," he said. He turned to go. She said, without planning to, "How do you know?" He stopped. He had his back to her. She watched the line of his shoulders. "Because in 3 weeks," he said, "you have replaced every single item in this library, in exactly the position you found it, without being told to, and without exception." A pause. "That is not a small thing." He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Ilara stood in the library with a thin green book in her hands, and the morning light coming through the tall windows, and the smell of old paper and coffee still in the air. She looked at the book. She looked at the door. She looked at the place on the shelf where the book had been, and where it would go back once she had read it. She sat down in one of the armchairs. She opened the book. And in the east wing, where no one ever went, Damian Blackwood stood in the corridor and leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling and pressed his knuckles against his mouth and breathed. His wolf was saying something. It was saying it quietly, which was almost worse than when it was loud. He had not recommended a book to anyone in 5 years. He had not voluntarily started a conversation in longer than he wanted to count. He turned and walked back to his study and closed the door. He sat down at his desk. He did not look at the documents in front of him. He sat there for a long time, with his hands flat on the desk, and his eyes on the window, and his wolf saying one word, over and over, until it filled the whole quiet room. "Mine. Mine. Mine." Strange things had begun to happen in Blackwood Manor, and Alara was beginning to be aware that she was at the center of them. It had started with the plants. She had not thought much of it the first time. She had been cleaning the study corridor on the ground floor, not the main study, the smaller one near the back of the house that Helen used for accounts, when she noticed that the potted plant on the windowsill, which had been entirely bare branches when she arrived, had small green leaves on it. 3 of them. She assumed it had simply been cold earlier, and was now recovering. A week later there were 12 leaves and 2 tight buds. Lily had stopped in the corridor to look at it with her head tilted, and said she had assumed it was dead. Helen had said nothing when she walked past it, but her eyes had dropped to the plant and stayed there for a fraction of a second longer than they needed to. Then it happened with the roses in the hall. There were 4 rose bushes in the entrance hall, real ones in ceramic pots, placed near the front windows. They had been woody and dormant since Alara arrived, which she had assumed was seasonal. On the morning she was cleaning the entrance hall for the 4th time, she noticed that one of them had a bloom, a single deep red bloom, fully open, in the 2nd week of November. She stood in front of it for a moment. She looked at the window. The light was gray and cold. There was no logical reason for a rose to be blooming in that light at this time of year. She cleaned around it carefully and said nothing to anyone. That afternoon, Owen came inside, which he rarely did, except for meals, and went straight to the hall. She was still there, finishing up. He stood in front of the rose bush and looked at the bloom for a long time. Then he looked at her. "How long has this been here?" he said. "I noticed it this morning," she said. He looked at the bloom again. He looked at her. Something in his expression was not surprise. "It is a nice rose," she said, because the silence was getting unusual. "It is," he said. He went back outside. She did not follow that thread any further that day. The second strange thing was the wolf pup. She had not known there was a wolf pup in the house. She had not known there were wolves on the property at all, though she supposed it made sense, given the forest that ran along the northern edge of the estate. What she had not expected was to open the door to the ground floor laundry room and find a small, dark-furred animal curled against the far wall, looking at her, with yellow eyes the color of new leaves. She stood in the doorway. The pup did not move. It was very small and thin in the way that animals are thin when they have not been eating, and its nose was tucked against its own flank. It looked at her. She said, very quietly, "Hello." The pup's ear moved. She did not go inside. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she went to the staff kitchen and found a bowl and filled it with water from the tap and tore a small piece of bread from the loaf on the counter and went back. The pup was still there. She set the bowl and the bread inside the doorway and stepped back and waited. The pup lifted its head. It looked at the bread. It looked at her. It looked at the bread again. It got up, slowly, stiffly, like something that had been lying in the same position too long, and it walked to the bread and ate it. Then it drank from the bowl. Then it looked at her. She sat down on the floor of the laundry room, cross-legged, and held out her hand, palm up. The pup walked over and put its chin on her palm. She sat like that for a long time. When Lily came looking for her, 20 minutes later, Lily stopped in the doorway and made a sound that was not quite a word. "How did you do that?" she said. "Do what?" Alara asked. "That pup has not moved from that corner in 4 days," Lily said. "Helen had the pack doctor come yesterday. He said it was not sick, just not eating. We could not get near it. Twice it bit Owen." She looked at the pup, which had now settled into Alara's lap with complete certainty. "How did you get it to come to you?" "I brought bread," Alara said. "We brought chicken," Lily said. "Cooked chicken. It didn't touch it." Alara looked at the pup. It had closed its yellow eyes. It was breathing steadily. "I think it just needed someone to sit still," Alara said. Lily looked at her with an expression that was kind and careful and very thoughtful. She said, "I'll tell Helen it's eating," and left. Alara sat in the laundry room with the wolf pup on her lap for another half hour, before she gently moved it to a folded blanket in the corner and went back to work. She saw Damien that afternoon in the ground floor hall. He was coming from the direction of the laundry room. He stopped when he saw her. "The pup," he said. "It ate," she said. "It's sleeping." He looked at her. Not briefly, not in passing. He looked at her the way she had started to recognize. Fully, directly, with something behind it that he was keeping tight control of. "It has not eaten in 4 days," he said. "I know," she said. "Lily told me." "What did you give it?" "Bread," she said. His jaw moved in that way she had noticed, like he was processing something that did not compute. "Thank you," he said. It was the first time he had said those words to her. They were simple and plain, and he said them with complete directness, and she felt them more than she expected to. "Of course," she said. He walked on. She stood in the hall for a moment. The third strange thing came from an unexpected direction. She had been aware of the older woman since her second week. Helen had introduced her briefly as Mira, a senior member of the household, which told Ilara nothing, except that the woman was not regular staff. Mira had a room on the second floor of the main house, not the staff wing, and she came and went at unusual hours, and seemed to answer to no one except herself. She was in her 70s, with white hair cut close to her head, and eyes that were a very particular shade of gray, the kind of gray that made you feel she had seen things that would take a long time to explain. Mira had not spoken to Ilara directly. She had looked at her, several times, from across a room or a corridor, with an expression that was not unkind, but was very specific. The expression of someone who has recognized something they were not sure they would find. On Wednesday of that week, Mira spoke to her. Ilara was in the first-floor corridor outside the guest rooms, replacing towels on the rack near the bathroom door, when she heard footsteps that were slower and more deliberate than the house's usual patterns. "You have a locket," Mira said. Ilara turned. The older woman was standing a few feet away, looking at her throat. Ilara put her hand to the small gold chain at her neck. The locket was always there, always under her collar, almost always invisible. She had not thought about the fact that it might have slipped out. "Yes," she said. "May I see it?" It was a strange request from a woman she had barely spoken to, but Mira's voice was calm, and her eyes were direct, and there was nothing about her that felt threatening. Ilara pulled the locket out from under her collar, and held it between her fingers, so that the woman could see without her having to remove it. Mira leaned forward very slightly. She looked at the locket for a long time. On the front of it was a small symbol, a circle, with a line through it, and 2 small marks on either side. She had never been able to identify it. Her mother had given it to her when she was 7, the last Christmas before she disappeared from Ilara's life, and she had worn it every day since. Mira straightened. "Where did you get it?" she said. "My mother," Ilara said. Mira was quiet for a moment. Something in her face had changed. A deepening of something, a settling of something, she had been holding in a lighter way before. "What was her name?" Mira said. "Catherine Cole," Ilara said. Her name was Catherine Cole. Mira looked at her for a long moment. "I see," she said. "Do you know her?" Ilara asked. "No," Mira said. "But I know that symbol. What does it mean?" Mira looked at her with those deep gray eyes and said, with great care, "It means more than I can tell you in a corridor." She straightened and adjusted the cardigan she was wearing. "When you have time, come to my room. Room 12, second floor. Come when you are not working." She walked away. Ilara stood in the corridor, with the locket between her fingers, and her pulse doing something irregular, and the racks of towels still half replaced behind her. She finished replacing the towels. She went back to work. She was methodical and calm, and she completed every task on her list by 4 o'clock. At 4:15 she knocked on the door of room 12 on the second floor. Mira opened it immediately, as if she had been waiting. "Come in," she said. The room was different from every other room in the house. Not in its furniture. It had the same dark wood and high ceilings as everywhere else. But it had things in it. Personal things. A shelf of small objects, stones, carved pieces of bone, a few pressed flowers behind glass. A rug on the floor with a pattern Ilara did not recognize but that felt old. Books on the bedside table that were not books she had seen in the library downstairs. Mira sat in the chair by the window and gestured to the small settee opposite. Ilara sat. "Tell me about your mother," Mira said.
"There is not much to tell," Ilara said. "She left when I was 7. I was raised by my grandmother until she passed when I was 17. After that, I managed on my own."
"Your grandmother," Mira said. "What do you remember about her?" Ilara thought. She was quiet, very calm. She never seemed to be frightened of anything. She grew things. She had a garden that was always blooming, no matter the season. Alara paused. People used to say she had green fingers. She laughed at that. Mira looked at her. Did animals like her? Alara blinked. Yes, she said, slowly. They always did. She used to say they knew who was safe. Mira nodded once. What does the symbol on my locket mean? Alara asked. Mira folded her hands in her lap. That symbol, she said, belongs to a bloodline called the Voss line. A very old bloodline. One that chose, many generations ago, to live outside its nature. She paused. Do you know what a dormant bloodline is? No, Alara said. There are people, Mira said carefully, who carry wolf blood, who are, by lineage, part of a world that runs alongside the ordinary human world. Most of them live inside that world openly. But some families, for their own reasons, war, grief, choice, fear, pulled away. They suppressed what they were, and raised their children as ordinary humans, and those children raised their children the same way, and after enough generations, what they were, became something deeper and quieter. Not gone, never gone, only sleeping. Alara was very still. Your grandmother, Mira said, was the last of the Voss line who knew what she was, which is why she never told you. She thought she was protecting you. The room was very quiet. You are telling me, Alara said, very carefully, that I am not entirely human. I am telling you, Mira said, that you are exactly what you have always been. You have simply not had the name for it. Alara looked at the locket in her hand. The small circle, the line through it, the two small marks. The things that have been happening, she said. The plants, the pup. Yes, Mira said. Those are because of me? Your blood is waking, Mira said. It happens sometimes when a dormant person finds a place where their nature is recognized. A place where what they are is already present in the air. She paused. This house is full of wolves, Alara. Has been for generations. Your blood can feel that, even if your mind has no framework for it. Alara put the locket back against her chest. And Damien Blackwood, she said. Mira said nothing. He is an alpha, Alara said. Not just a title. No, Mira said. Not just a title. Alara sat with this for a moment. All the strange feelings she had set aside and refused to follow, the electricity in the air, the way the house felt different when he was near, the words she had almost heard once in the kitchen, not quite out loud, not quite anywhere she could point to. Does he know? She asked. His wolf does, Mira said. Whether he has been honest with himself about what that means, I cannot say. He is a man who has spent 5 years being dishonest with himself about a great many things. Alara stood. She was not angry. She was not frightened. She was something else. Something that did not have an easy name. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something very large, and knowing you are going to have to look at it directly. Thank you for telling me, she said. There is more, Mira said, when you are ready. Alara nodded. She walked to the door. Alara, Mira said. She stopped. You were not brought here by an agency, Mira said quietly. You were brought here by something much older than an agency, that does not put its name on notice boards. A pause. I thought you should know that. Alara walked out into the corridor. She stood there for a moment with her hand on the door frame, and the quiet of the second floor all around her, and the weight of what she had just been told settling into her body, like something heavy, being lowered carefully into place. Then she straightened, and she went to find Damien Blackwood. She did not have to search for long. He was in the study. His study, not Helen's, the one she had never cleaned, the one whose door was always closed. She had walked past it enough times to know which room it was, at the end of the main ground floor corridor, with the dark wood door that had no visible handle on the outside. You had to know exactly where to press. She knew, because she had watched Helen go in once from the far end of the corridor, without thinking she was watching. She walked to the door. She pressed her palm to the wood where she had seen Helen press. The door opened. He was sitting at the desk. Standing, actually. He had been sitting and he had just stood, which told her the sound of her footsteps in the corridor had been different from every other set of footsteps, different enough to make him get up before she opened the door. He was looking at her. She stepped inside. She said, I have just spoken with Mira. His face did not change. she said. She told me about the Voss line. Still nothing. Still that perfect, terrible stillness. She crossed her arms, not in anger, as something to do with her body, while her mind was working very fast. I want to know, she said, how long you have known. His hands were flat on the desk, and his eyes were on her face, and his jaw was set. I want to know, she said again, if you have been aware of something about me that I was not told. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she had time to feel the exact shape of the question. Then he said, my wolf knew from the first moment. The linen room, she said. Before the linen room, he said. She looked at him. The staircase, he said. 3 weeks ago, when I saw you for the first time. She stood with this. And you said nothing. I was not certain what you were, he said. I was not certain of anything. I am still not certain of everything. A pause. But I knew what my wolf was telling me. And what was it telling you? He looked at her for a long moment. The light from the desk lamp was the only light in the room, and it made everything sharp and still, and very real. That you mattered, he said, in a way that nothing has mattered to me in 5 years. She uncrossed her arms. She looked at him, at the careful, contained, guarded man behind the desk, with his jaw set and his hands flat on the wood and his eyes on her face, and she thought about the plants, about the rose, about the wolf pup's chin on her palm, about the way the air changed when he was near. She thought about the word she had almost heard once, not quite out loud. I am not ready to do anything with this information, she said, not tonight, not immediately. I am not asking you to be, he said. I need time to understand what I am, she said, before I think about anything else. Yes, he said, simply, without argument. She looked at him for another moment. Good night, Mr. Blackwood, she said. She walked out of the study. The door closed softly behind her. She stood in the corridor. She breathed. And then she walked upstairs and sat on her bed and looked at the locket in her hand and felt, somewhere very deep beneath everything she knew about herself, the first faint, unmistakable stir of something she had never known was there. It was quiet and steady and old, like a fire that has not gone out but has been burning very low for a very long time. She held the locket. She let it burn. The morning after her conversation with Damien should have felt heavier than it did. Ilara had expected to wake up with the weight of it pressing down on her. The things Mira had told her, the things Damien had said, the words she had carried carefully back to her room and held through the night. She had expected to feel uncertain and unsteady, the way she always felt when too much information arrived at once. Instead, she felt something that was more like clearness. Not calm, exactly, but clear, like a fogged window that someone had just wiped in a single stroke, leaving the view sharp and cold and true. She dressed. She went to breakfast. She ate her toast and drank her tea, and answered Lily's questions about whether she had slept well, and when Lily tilted her head and looked at her with that particular look, and asked if something had happened, Ilara said simply, "A few things, I'm working through them." Lily nodded, which was something Ilara had come to appreciate about her. She knew when to press, and when to let a thing breathe. Owen was reading his newspaper. He did not look up, but when Ilara stood to leave, he said, without lowering the paper, "The rose has 2 more blooms this morning." She paused with her cup in her hand. "I noticed," she said. "There will be more," Owen said, still reading, still not looking up. She went upstairs to begin her work. The week moved in a way that felt like 2 different speeds at once, slow in the ordinary hours, when she was working, and the house was quiet, and everything was its usual self, and fast in the moments when she was aware of what was happening beneath the surface of those ordinary hours. She saw Damien every day. That had not changed, but the quality of it had changed, shifted somehow since the night she walked into his study. The careful distance was still there. He did not cross into her space. He did not touch her. He gave her room in corridors and doorways as he always had. But the pretense that the distance was indifference had dissolved. He looked at her, directly and without apology, not invasively, not with anything that made her uncomfortable, with a quality she did not have a perfect word for. She kept arriving at something close to recognition. The look of a person who sees something they have been looking for without knowing they were looking, and has since made peace with the fact that they found it. She did not know what to do with that yet. She had told him she needed time, and he had agreed without argument, and he was keeping that agreement. But understanding continued whether she invited it or not, and she was beginning to understand, slowly and carefully and on her own terms, that what Mira had told her was true, that the feeling she had been carrying since her first day in this house, the feeling she had put in every available quiet corner and refused to examine, was not her imagination. It was blood recognizing blood. It was something older than either of them knowing it had found what it was meant to find. On Thursday, she went back to Mira's room. The older woman had a kettle on the small table near the window and 2 cups already waiting, which meant she had heard the footsteps in the corridor and known who they belonged to. "Sit," Mira said. Alara sat. They drank tea, and Mira talked. She did not rush. She laid things out in the careful, unhurried way of someone who has a great deal to say, and knows that saying it too fast means it does not land properly. She told Alara about wolves. Not the kind from old stories, not the kind children were frightened of, but the real kind, the kind that Blackwood Manor had been built around for 3 generations. A community of people for whom the nature inside them was not supernatural but biological, as natural as breathing, as private as everything else a person keeps inside themselves. The Ironclad Pack, they called themselves. The name was old, older than the manor, older than any living member. It meant something about endurance, about surviving things that should have broken them. She told Alara about dormant bloodlines, about the Voss family specifically, who had left the pack world 3 generations back, after a conflict that Mira described only as old and unresolved, about how the suppression of the wolf side passed down through generations, not as absence but as dormancy, a sleeping thing, present, waiting, sustained by the body, without the body knowing. She told Alara about the locket. The symbol on it was the Voss mark, a circle, with a line through it and 2 points on the sides, which in the old pack language meant a moon seen through branches, a symbol of concealment, of something present in the dark. "You wore it without knowing what it said," Mira said. "I wore it because my mother gave it to me," Alara said. "Yes," Mira said, "that is how these things pass. Not in explanations, in objects, in habits, in the way you sit still around animals without trying, in the way things grow in rooms where you have been." Alara wrapped both hands around her cup. "The wolf pup," she said. "Wolves can sense what people are," Mira said. "Not precisely, not the way an adult can read it, but they feel the difference. That pup was frightened and hungry, and would not eat from any hand it did not trust. When you held yours out, it did not smell ordinary human. It smelled something close enough to its own kind that it felt safe." Mira paused. That pup's instincts were not wrong. Alara was quiet for a moment. "When does it wake up?" she asked. "The wolf side." "It is already waking," Mira said. "Has been since you arrived. The plants, the roses, the way the pup responded. Those are the signs of a dormant bloodline being reactivated by proximity to an active pack." She looked at Alara steadily. "It takes time. It is not like a switch. Your body has to learn a language it was taught to forget." "Does it hurt?" Alara asked. "No," Mira said. "It feels like remembering." Alara looked at her hands. Mira said, more quietly, "It will not change who you are, Alara. It will only make more of you visible." Alara looked up. "I have never felt entirely like I fit," she said. She had not planned to say it. It came out simply, the way things do when they have been held back long enough. "My whole life, not in any place or with any person, I always felt slightly beside the point of wherever I was." Mira looked at her with those gray eyes. "Because you were carrying a life that was not the full one," she said. "Not wrong, not broken, simply incomplete." Alara sat with this. She thought about her grandmother's garden, always blooming, every season. She thought about the way animals had always moved toward her, every time, in every place. Stray dogs and park birds, and once, memorably, a fox that had walked up to her on a city pavement and sat down and looked at her for a full minute before trotting away. She thought about the cold feeling when she arrived at Blackwood Manor, the one she had interpreted as unwelcome. She thought, what if it was not unwelcome? What if it was recognition? "Mira," she said, "when you first saw me, the first day I arrived, what did you feel?" Mira set down her cup. I felt the same thing I feel when a long letter finally arrives after a very long wait, she said. I felt, there you are. Ilara looked at her. You knew, she said, even before I came. Mira smiled. It was a careful smile, the kind that has history behind it. The moon goddess, she said, does not send things without notice. Only the people involved are ever surprised. Ilara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Damien Blackwood's wolf recognized me before his mind knew what it was recognizing. Yes, Mira said. And you are telling me that is not coincidence, or biology, or convenience. I am telling you, Mira said, that it is all of those things, and also the oldest thing there is, and that in the end, they are the same thing. Ilara stood. She moved to the window and looked out at the garden below. The late November light was thin and white and sharp, and the garden was bare, the way gardens are when everything has drawn back inside itself to wait. But along the south wall, where she had walked every Tuesday morning with her cleaning cart, a line of something small and green was coming up through the cold soil. She had not noticed it before. She noticed it now. She stood at the window for a long time.
What do I do?
She said. What would you like to do? Mira asked. Ilara turned from the window. I would like to understand what I am before I decide anything about anything else. Then understand, Mira said. Come back tomorrow. Bring the locket. Ilara nodded. She walked to the door. She stopped. Does he know I came to see you? She asked. Mira considered this. He knows I would find you eventually, she said. He knows I have been watching since you arrived. Whether he knows you came today, I cannot say. He is a man who senses things without being told them. A pause. But he will not interfere. He gave me his word on that, though I did not ask for it. He volunteered it? The morning after you confronted him in his study, Mira said. He came to me before breakfast and said that whatever I needed to tell you, he would not stand in the way of it, and that you were to be given every piece of information without his interference. Her eyes were steady. That is not a small thing, for an alpha. Ilara thought about that for a moment. No, she said, it isn't. She left. She went back to work. She finished the corridor she had left half done, and went to the library, and dusted the last 2 shelves she had been working toward for 2 weeks. She found the place where the thin green book had come from, and she looked at the space next to it, and she thought about a man who had marked every book he owned since he was 17, and had reached past her to hand her one. She did not go looking for him. But at 3 in the afternoon, when she came around the corner of the east side corridor on the ground floor, and found him standing at the window at the end of it, looking out at the garden, she did not look away. He heard her before she was close enough to be seen, and he turned. They looked at each other across the length of the corridor. She walked toward him, not all the way to the window, halfway. I spoke with Mira again, she said. I know, he said. She told me more. Yes. I want to keep learning, she said, on my own timeline. I would expect nothing else, he said. She looked at him. In the flat afternoon light he was very real. The dark hair, the sharp lines of his face, the hands loose at his sides, not performing distance. Not performing warmth either, simply present. When you say your wolf knew from the first moment, she said, what does that mean exactly? What did it tell you? He was quiet for a moment. A wolf, he said carefully, is not a separate creature. It is part of you, a deeper part, older than language. When it responds to someone the way mine responded to you, it is not a message you receive and then decide about. It is more like a recognition of something your bones already knew before your mind arrived. She looked at him. And what did your bones know? She asked. He held her gaze. That you were the person I was going to have to learn to be honest with, he said, after a very long time of being honest with no one. She was quiet for a moment. She thought, that is the most honest thing he has ever said, and he said it completely calmly. I am going back to Mira tomorrow, she said. Good, he said. She turned to leave. Ilara, he said. She turned back. The book, he said. The green one. Did you finish it? She thought about it. She had read it in 3 sessions, in the armchair by the fireplace in the library, in the mornings before the house fully woke up. Yes, she said. And, he he said. She thought about what she had felt reading it. The particular kind of feeling that comes from a book that does not tell you something new, but confirms something you already knew, and had not yet said aloud. It felt like being told something I had already understood, she said. He nodded. That is why I keep it where I can see it, he said. She went back to her room. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook to the page with the numbers. The savings. The small growing proof that she was building something. And she looked at the numbers for a moment. Then she turned to a blank page. She wrote, "What I know." She sat with the pen in her hand for a long time. Then she began to write. Not conclusions. Not plans. Only what she knew, who she was, what she had been before she came here, and what she was learning she might also be. The grandmother's garden, the fox on the pavement, the locket, the symbol, the rose in November, the wolf pup's chin on her palm. She wrote until her hand was tired. Then she closed the notebook and sat in the quiet room and felt, for the first time in as long as she could remember, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Outside the window, something moved in the garden below. She leaned forward. The wolf pup was in the garden, small and dark-furred, moving through the bare flower beds with its nose to the ground. It stopped at the line of small green shoots along the south wall and sniffed at them. Then it looked up at her window. She pressed her hand flat against the glass. It wagged its tail, once, and went back to sniffing. She stayed at the window until the light faded and the garden went dark, and then she went to bed. She did not dream. Or if she did, she only dreamed of green things growing. She had learned, in the 5 weeks she had been at Blackwood Manor, to read the house the way you read weather. There were signs, if you knew how to look at them. Certain sounds that meant the day would pass quietly, without event. The particular silence that settled after Owen finished his outdoor work and came inside for lunch. The way Helen's footsteps changed pace in the afternoon, when everything was running smoothly. The sound of Lily humming 3 rooms away, which meant nothing was wrong. And there were other signs, the ones she had only started to notice more recently. The way the air in the main corridor changed when Damien had been there and then wasn't. A residue, like warmth left in a chair. The way the wolf pup, which had taken to following her from room to room in a casual way, went suddenly still and alert sometimes, for no reason she could see. Until, a minute later, she would hear Damien's footsteps somewhere in the house, and understand that the pup had heard them long before she could. She had started thinking of the pup as a kind of compass, useful information. What she had not been ready for was what happened on the Thursday morning in the last week of November. It began with a car she did not recognize on the drive. She saw it from the library window at 9:30, a dark car, larger and newer than anything she had seen arrive at the manor, pulling up to the front without the usual quiet arrival of the household delivery vehicles. 2 people got out. A man she had not seen before, tall, dark-jacketed, moving with the kind of physical ease that reminded her of Damien in the way it occupied space, and a woman. Ilara registered the woman the way you register something that is very deliberately constructed to be registered. She was tall and well-dressed, and beautiful in a cold, precise way, with dark hair, and a bearing that was the particular bearing of someone who has never had to wonder whether they belonged somewhere. She walked toward the front door like she owned it. Helen opened the front door before they reached it. Ilara turned away from the window and went back to the shelf she had been dusting. She told herself she had no reason to feel the things she was feeling. She was right. She had no reason. She felt it anyway. Lily found her in the library an hour later. She came in with her hair tucked behind both ears, and her expression carrying a very specific kind of careful. "Did you see the visitors?" she said. "From the window," Ilara said. "That's Kane Wheeler," Lily said, "the Alpha's second. He was here a few weeks ago." "Yes," Ilara said. "I remember you mentioned him." "And the woman with him is Vessa Holt," Lily said. "She said the name the way you say a name you have said before, but never comfortably. She's been around the pack a long time. She believes herself to be, that is, she has very strong opinions about her position in the pack, and specifically, about her position relative to Mr. Blackwood." Ilara kept her hands moving along the shelf. "What kind of opinions?" she said. Lily said, carefully, "The kind that 5 years of widowhood has not yet settled into reality." Ilara was quiet. Lily said, "I'm only telling you, because you should know she is in the house." And because Helen is going to tell you to keep to the staff wing this afternoon, and I thought it would be less confusing if you heard the reason first. Thank you, Ilara said. Lily left. Ilara finished the shelf. She did keep to the staff wing that afternoon, as Helen instructed. She cleaned the corridor outside the staff rooms, and helped Lily fold the week's laundry, and restocked the supply cupboard near the back stairs. She was methodical and quiet, and she did not let her mind go to the main house more than twice. At 4 o'clock, she went to the staff kitchen to start the kettle. She was waiting for it to boil when she heard voices in the corridor that ran alongside the kitchen. The wall between them was thick, and the voices were low, and she was not trying to listen. But the house had its own acoustics, and certain sounds carried regardless of intention. She heard Helen's voice, brief and clipped. She heard a woman's voice she did not recognize, smooth and certain, and with an edge underneath it that was not quite friendliness. She heard words she could not make out, and then she heard her own name. She went very still, not because she was certain she had heard it, because she was certain she had. Ilara Cole, the smooth voice said, clearly enough that the wall could not muffle it. The new housekeeper. And then Helen's voice, even and final. She does her work, and she does it well. That is all that is relevant. A pause. Then the smooth voice, lower now, close to the wall. Does he know how often he goes looking for her? Ilara set her cup down on the counter very carefully. Silence from Helen. The silence of a woman who will not be drawn. A moment later, footsteps moved away down the corridor. Ilara stood in the kitchen and breathed. She made her tea. She sat at the table and held the mug with both hands and thought about the cold certainty in that smooth voice. Not anger, something more careful than anger, something that had done its calculations and was not pleased with the results. She sat there for a long time. At 5:30, Lily came into the kitchen. She sat down across from Ilara without being asked and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "She found you today, didn't she?" "I heard her in the corridor," Ilara said. "I did not speak with her." "But she found you," Lily said. "She always finds the thing she is looking for." Ilara looked at her. Lily folded her hands on the table. She was not performing casualness. She was being direct in the way she was sometimes direct when she thought Ilara needed it. "Vesa Holt has been coming to this house since before his wife died," she said. "She has believed for a long time that when he was ready, he would turn to her, because of her position in the pack, because she has been patient." A pause. "She is not a bad person. I think she genuinely feels something real. But she has confused her feeling for a guarantee, and now she is looking at a situation that does not match the guarantee, and she does not know what to do with it." "What situation?" Ilara said. Lily looked at her steadily. "You," she said. Ilara looked at her tea. "I am the maid," she said. "Yes," Lily said. "And the roses are blooming in November. And the wolf pup has not left your side in 2 weeks. And Mira spends hours with you in her room. And the alpha comes to the library on mornings he has never come to the library in 2 years. A pause. "Ilara, this house is not blind." Ilara was quiet. She heard Owen come in from outside and set his boots by the door and wash his hands at the sink. "What did she say?" Owen said, not looking at them. "Specifically?" "I only heard a few words," Ilara said. "My name. A question to Helen about how often he comes looking for me." Owen dried his hands. "And what did Helen say?" "That I do my work well, and that was all that was relevant." Owen turned and sat down at the table and picked up the newspaper and then set it back down and looked at Ilara directly, which was rarer than rain. "She will not come for you directly," he said. "Vesa, she is too intelligent for that. She will come for the situation. She will try to make the situation seem out of proportion to what it is. She will use her position to make you feel like you do not belong here." "She might be right about that," Ilara said. "She is not right about that," Owen said. He picked up his newspaper. Lily looked at Ilara and said nothing else. She did not need to. After dinner, Ilara went to find Mira. She had not planned to. She had planned to go to her room and read and sleep, but the evening had a weight to it that she wanted to put down somewhere useful, and Mira's room had begun to feel like the place where she could do that. Mira was reading. She set her book down when Ilara came in and looked at her. "You met Vesa," Mira said. Not exactly, Ilara said. She met me. Mira gestured to the settee. Ilara sat. She will not make your life easy, Mira said. She has too much invested in the idea of what this house should be, to accept something she did not plan for. And am I something she did not plan for? Ilara asked. Mira looked at her. You are the thing the moon goddess did not ask her permission about, she said. Which is the most inconvenient kind of thing. Ilara half smiled, involuntarily. She said something that worried me more than her presence did, Ilara said. She asked Helen if he knows how often he goes looking for me. Mira was quiet. Does he? Ilara asked. Does he know that he does it? He knows everything he does, Mira said. He is not a man who acts without awareness. He acts against his best judgment sometimes, but he always knows what he is doing. A pause. Whether he has admitted to himself the reason he does it, that is a different question. He told me his wolf knew from the first moment, Ilara said. Yes, Mira said, but knowing and accepting are two very different things for a man who has spent 5 years building his life around the space where someone used to be. Ilara looked at the rug on the floor. His wife, she said. Clara, Mira said, quietly. She was a good person, warm, loved deeply by the pack. What happened to her was sudden, and terrible, and entirely beyond anyone's control. She paused. He has carried the guilt of it, the way people carry guilt for things they could not have prevented. That is the worst kind of guilt. It has nowhere to go. What happened? Ilara asked. Mira looked at her steadily. That is for him to tell you, she said, when he is ready. It is not mine to carry further than I already have. Ilara accepted that. What should I do about Vesa? She asked. Nothing, Mira said simply. You do not fight for positions you have not chosen to want. If you choose to want it, you will not need to fight, because what the bond gives, no one can take by standing in the way of it. Ilara thought about that. And if I do not choose, she said. Mira looked at her with those clear gray eyes. Then that is also a choice, she said, and it would be respected. Ilara sat for a moment. But the bond is all ready, she said, and stopped. Yes, Mira said. Can it be refused, permanently? It can be refused, Mira said. It costs something, from both sides, but it can be refused. She paused. The moon goddess does not force. She proposes. What people do with the proposal is their own. Ilara stood. She went to Mira's window and looked out at the dark garden. In the garden below, very faint in the thin moonlight, she could see the line of green shoots along the south wall. She had been watching them all week. They were taller now. She thought about her grandmother, about a woman who had known what she was, and chosen to live as something simpler because the world she belonged to had hurt her. She thought about the price of that, the garden that bloomed anyway, the animals that always came, the granddaughter who wore a locket without knowing what it said and felt beside the point of everywhere she went. She thought about the cost of refusing. Not his cost. Her own. She turned. I should sleep, she said. Yes, Mira said. She walked to the door. She stopped. Mira, she said. Did you know this would happen when you chose to stay in this house? Mira considered the question for a long time. I stayed in this house, she said, because this is where my pack is, and my pack needed me here. But if I had been asked whether this would happen someday, whether the Voss line would find its way home, she picked up her book. I would not have been surprised. Ilara went to her room. She did not sleep immediately. She lay in the dark and thought about home, and what it meant, and the many forms it could take. Outside, the wolf pup scratched at her door. She got up and let it in. It walked to the foot of the bed and curled up there with complete certainty, and within 60 seconds it was breathing slowly. She lay back down. She looked at the ceiling. She thought, I have been homeless my entire life, and I did not know I was looking for a place until I was already in it. She closed her eyes. She slept without dreaming of anything small. She woke the next morning to the sound of raised voices. Not loud, not shouting, but distinct and sharp, in the way that voices are when they are trying to stay below a ceiling they are about to break through. She lay still for a moment and listened, and could not make out words, only the pattern of them. 2 voices, one steady, one with more motion in it. She She did not recognize either of them from her bed on the third floor. She dressed quickly. On the second floor landing, she heard it more clearly. The voices were below, in the main entrance hall. She went to the railing and looked down. Vesa Holt was standing in the middle of the entrance hall in a long dark coat, with her hands at her sides and her back perfectly straight. She was speaking to Helen, who was standing 3 feet away from her, with her hands folded in front of her, and an expression that had no emotion in it at all, which Alara had learned was Helen's particular way of being furious. Lily appeared at her elbow, coming from the direction of the linen cupboard with a set of towels pressed to her chest. She looked down at the hall, and then at Alara, and made a face that communicated both warning and an intense desire to hear what was being said. The words reached them in pieces. Alara caught, "The staff schedule," and, "This is not how this house is run." And from Helen, "The house is run as Mr. Blackwood directs it." Then Vesa said something that did not carry far enough to catch. Helen said, "I think you should speak with him directly, if you have a concern." Vesa said, "I intend to." She turned. She walked toward the corridor that led to the east wing. Alara stepped back from the railing, not out of fear, out of something she was identifying, as clearly and honestly as she could, as instinct, the particular instinct that says, "Stay out of what is not yours yet." Yet. She noticed the word. She went back to the third floor, and picked up her cleaning supplies, and went to the upper guest corridor, and started her work. She was 2 rooms in when she heard it. Not voices this time. One voice. His. Clear and even, and carrying the kind of weight that did not need to be raised to fill a space. She could not hear words. She could only hear the tone. And the tone said, "This conversation is over." A door closed. A minute later, footsteps on the stairs. Not his. The lighter, faster footsteps of someone who had been shown to the edge of a boundary, and was retreating from it with as much dignity as possible. Alara kept working. At lunch, she came downstairs to find Helen, already in the kitchen, with her hands around a cup of tea, and her jaw set at an angle Alara had not seen before. Alara sat down and said nothing. Helen said, "You may carry on your full schedule this afternoon, including the East Corridor linen room, if it needs attention." "It does," Alara said. "Good," Helen said. She drank her tea. Owen came in, sat down, looked at Helen, looked at Alara, and said, "She's gone?" "She's gone," Helen said. Owen nodded and opened his newspaper. Alara ate her lunch. She was in the hallway on her way back to the upper floor when she heard him coming from the direction of his study. She did not stop. She continued walking. He fell into step beside her. This had not happened before. In all the weeks she had been in the house, they had passed each other, spoken across distances, stood in the same rooms, but he had not walked beside her. The simple ordinariness of it was startling. "Helen told me you saw Vesa yesterday afternoon," he said. "I heard her," Alara said, "in the corridor. I did not speak with her." "She should not have been in that corridor," he said. "I know. She will not be back," he said. "You spoke with her this morning," Alara said. "Yes." "Helen does not usually allow her expression to shift like that," Alara said. Something moved in his jaw. "No," he said. "She doesn't." They had reached the staircase. She put her hand on the railing. He stopped. She looked at him. He was looking at the railing, not at her, with the particular expression he had when he was choosing his words very carefully. "What she said about you," he said. "Whatever she said, or implied. She didn't say anything to me," Alara said. "Only to Helen." He looked at her now. "I know what she said to Helen." Alara looked back at him. "Does it bother you?" she asked. "What she said?" He was quiet. "What bothers me," he said, "is that she believes she has standing to say anything at all about you, about who you are, about where you belong in this house." Alara was quiet for a moment. "Do I?" she said. He looked at her. "Belong?" she said, not provocatively, as an honest question. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "You know that." She looked at him for a moment longer. "I'm learning it," she said. She went up the stairs. Behind her, she heard him stay at the bottom of them for a moment, before walking back toward his study. She finished her afternoon work, and went to Mira's room at 5. Mira was not reading. She was sitting in her chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the window. And when Alara came in, she did not need to ask what had happened. She is gone, Mira said. For now, Alara said. For good, Mira said, with a certainty that was not cruelty, only fact. Alara sat on the settee. He said I belong here, she said. Mira looked at her. He said it like he meant it, Alara said. He always means what he says, Mira said. That is the most reliable thing about him. He says very little, and every word is real. Alara looked at her hands. I am beginning to believe, she said, slowly, that I am going to stop being afraid of this. What does afraid mean, for you? Mira asked. Alara thought about it. That I will want something that is too large, she said. That I will believe in something that does not hold. That I will build a feeling on a foundation that turns out to be smaller than the feeling. She paused. I have done it before. Not here. In other places. Before this one. I know what it costs. And what makes this different? Mira asked. Alara was quiet for a long time. He is not trying to win something, she said. He is not building toward a destination. He is just present. Genuinely present in the way that people almost never are. She paused. And when he says things, I believe him. Without trying to. Without reminding myself to. I simply believe him. Mira looked at her with those gray eyes. That, she said, is what the bond gives. When it is real. Not fireworks. Not impossibility. Only that. The simple, tremendous relief of believing someone. Alara exhaled. She had not known until this moment how long she had been holding that breath. Mira, she said. Yes. Thank you, she said. For the things you have told me. And for seeing me, before I could see myself. Mira looked at her. You were not difficult to see, she said. You have been standing there the whole time. Alara sat until the room went dark outside the window. Mira turned on the small lamp. They did not talk for a while. It was the kind of quiet that does not need filling. When she left, she went downstairs instead of up. She walked to the study corridor. The door was closed, as it always was. She stood outside it and listened, and heard nothing, and pressed her palm to the wood. She did not go in. She stood there for a moment. Then she said, quietly, to the door, "Good night." A pause. His voice came through the wood, low and unhurried. "Good night, Alara." She walked upstairs. The wolf pup was waiting at her door. She let it in. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook to the page that said "What I Know," and under everything she had written before, she wrote one more thing. She wrote, "I am not afraid anymore." Then she looked at it for a moment and crossed out "not afraid" and wrote, "ready." She closed the notebook. Outside, the night was clear and cold and full of stars, and the forest beyond the garden was quiet. She was ready. The nights had been getting longer. Alara noticed it in the way she noticed most things now. Not loudly, not with alarm, but steadily. The darkness came earlier. The mornings were sharp and cold, and the frost on the garden stones lasted until almost noon. December had arrived without announcement, the way it always did in old houses in hill country, and the manor had deepened into its winter self. More fires burning in the evenings, more quiet. The particular thick silence of a house, under cold, that is not uncomfortable, but is very present. She had been at Blackwood Manor for just over 2 months. She knew the house now, the way you know a place when you have worked in it long enough that your feet move through it without instruction. She knew which floorboards spoke and which ones didn't. She knew the window on the Upper East corridor that would not stay latched without the specific trick of lifting and pressing at the same time. She knew that the library was warmest between 9 and 11 in the morning, when the sunlight came through the tall south windows at the right angle, and fell across the reading chairs, in a way that was genuinely beautiful if you were paying attention. She had been paying attention. She paid attention to most things now in a way she had not known she was missing before she came here. It was as if the house, or the people in it, or the slow waking of something inside her, that she had been carrying without knowing, some combination of all of those, had sharpened her. The world had more texture than it had before, more sound, more detail. She noticed things, and they stayed noticed. The wolf pup had a name, she had decided. She had not asked anyone else what they called it. She called it Arrow because of the way it moved. direct and purposeful, and always in the straightest line between 2 points. Arrow followed her through the house in the mornings and slept at the foot of her bed at night, and regarded the world with calm yellow eyes that had, from the beginning, looked at her like she was the most obvious conclusion. She understood now why. 2 months ago she would have said the animal had simply chosen her by accident. Now she understood that nothing in this house chose by accident. She was in the library on a Tuesday morning in the first week of December when Damien came in. This was not unusual now. He had been coming to the library in the mornings more often. Not every morning, not always when she was there, but enough that it had become a pattern she recognized. He brought his coffee and sometimes a document he was working through and sometimes nothing at all, and he sat in the other reading chair, or stood at the shelves, and the library held both of them without difficulty. This morning was different. He came in at 9:30, and he did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the room with his coffee and he said, "I have something I want to tell you." She put down the cloth she was holding. She waited. He was looking at the fireplace, not at her. His jaw was set, and she had learned by now the difference between his jaw set in professional stillness and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was making himself say something he would rather not have to begin. He said, "My wife's name was Clara." She stayed still. "She was 29 when she died," he said. "She died from a blood illness, one that runs in some wolf bloodlines. Rare, very fast, and at the time we did not know she had it until she was already too far into it." A pause. "She died in this house, in the East Wing, and I have been living inside the guilt of that for 5 years, because I did not know earlier, because I believed that if I had pushed harder to run the blood work that is standard for a newly mated pair, I would have had more time to—" He stopped. Ilara waited. "There was nothing to be done," he said. "The doctors were clear. Even if we had known 6 months earlier, nothing would have changed the outcome. It is an aggressive illness, and at the time there was no treatment." A pause. "I know this. I have known it for 5 years, and I have lived inside the guilt anyway, because guilt does not care about medical fact." He stopped. She said nothing. She understood that there was nothing to say to this. Not yet. She waited. "I closed the East Wing because she died there," he said. "I know that is not logical. She is not there. The room is simply a room. But it felt, at the time, like if I kept people out of those rooms, I was keeping something intact." He looked at the fire. "I kept the whole pack at a careful distance for the same reason. I kept myself very controlled." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I am not telling you this so that you will feel." He stopped. "I am not asking for—" He stopped again. "You are telling me," she said quietly, "because I asked you about the East Wing, on my first day, and you have been carrying the reason since then, and you decided I should have it." He looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. She looked at him across the warm library, with the fire going and the morning light on the shelves, and Arrow curled up near the hearth with his yellow eyes half open. She said, "Thank you for telling me." He nodded. He turned to go. "Damien," she said. He stopped. "She would have wanted the roses back," she said. "I think." A long pause. "Yes," he said, "she would have." He left. She stood in the library for a long time. She thought about a woman called Clara. She thought about what it meant to build a life around something that was gone and could not come back, and how long it could last, and what it cost, and what it would take to choose something else. She thought about what it cost to be loved by someone still gripped by grief, not because that love was lesser. It was not. She was beginning to understand it was not. But because the person doing the loving had to learn to be alive again first, and that was not a short process. She could not rush it, she would not. But she held the conversation in her chest all day, and it sat there with unexpected warmth. The week moved quietly. She and Damien did not have another conversation like that one. They moved through their days alongside each other in the way they had been moving, present, aware, close in a way that did not require words for every moment. Some things communicated better in the space between people than in the things people said, and she had begun to trust that space. On Friday, Kane Wheeler came back. She saw his car from the upper corridor window and thought, "Here." She had not stopped thinking about what Owen had said. That real loyalty is the kind where you say the hard things. She believed that. She had come to a quiet understanding of Kane, that he was a man doing the thing a real second does, which is to put the pack's good above the alpha's comfort, even when those two things temporarily pointed in different directions. She was not afraid of him. She finished her work in the upper corridor and went downstairs at midday and found him in the entrance hall alone, looking at the rose bush. There were 7 blooms on it now. He heard her before she reached the bottom of the staircase and turned. He was larger up close than she remembered from the corridor weeks ago. He looked at her with steady dark eyes that were doing a very precise kind of assessment. She looked back at him. "Miss Cole," he said. "Mr. Wheeler," she said. He looked at the roses. "These were not blooming when I was last here," he said. "No," she said. "Mira told me," he said, "about the bloodline." She met his gaze. "All right," she said. "I came today to speak with Damien," he said. "I also came to speak with you. If you were willing." "Go ahead," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "The pack has been watching what is happening in this house, and they are not settled about it. Some of them have old loyalties that are uncomfortable with the idea of the alpha re-engaging with anyone. There are also those who have positions they believe are threatened." "Vesa," she said. He nodded once. "And others. What I came to say is this. The pack follows strength. They follow someone who knows what they want and stands in it without apology." He paused. "Damien has been standing to the side of his own life for 5 years. The pack feels that, whether they are conscious of it or not. A wolf without their whole self is not at full strength, and when an alpha is not at full strength, everything around them destabilizes." He paused. "Whatever you decide about this situation, I would ask you to decide it clearly, because half decisions will not serve anyone." She looked at him. "You are not asking me to decide quickly," she said. "You are asking me not to avoid deciding." "Yes," he said. "I am not avoiding it," she said. He looked at her steadily. Then something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but changed, like he had been holding the shape of uncertainty, and had just received information that allowed him to set it down. "Good," he said. She said, "For what it is worth, I did not come here with an agenda. I came here with a bag and a need for work, and very little else. Whatever is happening honestly." "I know," he said. "That is the most reassuring thing about it." He went to find Damien. She went to the staff kitchen and made herself tea and sat at the table, and let the afternoon settle into its normal shape. Owen came in at 4. He filled the kettle, and sat down without being asked, and said, "Wheeler's still here." "I know," she said. "He talked to you," Owen said. "Briefly," she said. Owen looked at his hands. "He is not a bad man," he said. "He is a man who takes responsibility for a great many people very seriously. That can make him seem hard." "He seemed clear," Elara said. "I can work with clear." Owen half smiled. It was very small. She had never seen it before. It was gone immediately, replaced by his usual steady face. "Yes," he said. "You are quite good at that." After dinner that evening she went upstairs and knocked on Mira's door. Mira was not surprised to see her. They sat in their usual places, and Mira looked at her with clear eyes and waited. "Kane came today," Elara said. "Yes," Mira said. "He asked me to decide clearly," Elara said. "Are you going to?" Mira said. Elara looked at her. "I already have," she said. Mira was quiet. "I am not running from this," Elara said. "I am not pretending I do not feel what I feel. I am not letting fear of being wrong talk me into being small." She paused. "My grandmother was small her whole life, because she was afraid. She had something real in her blood, and she suppressed it, because the world she came from had hurt her. And she was a wonderful woman, and I loved her more than I can say, but I watched her spend her whole life half present in it." A pause. "I do not want to be half present in my life," Mira said, very quietly. "No. He needs time," Elara said. "I understand that. What he told me about Clara, I am not going to rush that. I am not going to push past where he is, but I am not going to pretend anymore that I am only here to clean the house." Mira looked at her with an expression that was, beneath its usual careful surface, something very close to pride. "No," she said, "you are not." Elara sat for a moment. "What do I do?" she said. "Practically." Tomorrow morning, what do I do? What you have been doing, Mira said. You wake up, you work well, you are honest, you give him room. A pause. And you stop pretending that standing next to something does not make it real. Alara nodded. She stood. Mira, she said. Yes. Thank you, she said. For the things you have told me, and for seeing me, before I could see myself. Mira looked at her. You were not difficult to see, she said. You have been standing there the whole time. Alara went to bed. Arrow settled at the foot of the bed. The house breathed its steady night breathing around her. The fire she had laid in the small grate before dinner had burned down to a low warmth. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. She thought, tomorrow, I will do exactly what I have been doing, because that has been the right thing all along. She thought, the thing that is between us is real, and I know it is real, and I am not afraid of things that are real. She closed her eyes. She slept the way she had learned to sleep in this house, deeply, without the watchful layer she had carried into every bed before this one, without the part of her that was always half awake and waiting for the floor to shift. Outside, the December night was clear and cold, and the stars were very bright. Inside the east wing, the lights were off for the first time in a long time, not because no one was there, because the man who lived there had, for the first time in 5 years, gone to bed before midnight, and he was lying on his back in the dark looking at the ceiling, and the guilt he had been carrying was not gone. It would not be gone tonight, or many nights after, but it was sitting differently. Like something that had been held too tight for too long, and had only just been set down on a flat surface. Like the beginning of a rest. She did not see it coming. That was the thing she would remember afterward, not the event itself, but the fact that the house had given her no sign. The morning had been as ordinary as mornings got in December. Gray light through the upper windows, frost on the garden, Arrow at her heels, the staff kitchen warm and smelling of tea. She had done her morning work. She had gone to the library and sat in the reading chair and finished the last 30 pages of the book Damien had recommended, the thin green one, which she had now read twice and was beginning to understand differently the second time. She had restocked 2 linen cupboards and fixed the latch on the east window for the 4th time and made a note to ask Owen if he could look at the mechanism properly. She had felt, that morning, genuinely settled. Which was why what happened that afternoon landed the way it did. She was in the upper guest corridor at 2:30, running a cloth along the baseboard near the far window, when she heard voices below, not in the house, outside, on the gravel drive at the front. 2 cars she did not recognize. She did not go to the window. She kept working. Visitors came and went, and it was not her place to monitor them. She heard the front door open. And then she heard a voice that she had heard once before, in a corridor she was not supposed to have been listening through, smooth and precise, and carrying a quality that had then, and still now, put the small hairs on the back of her neck into a state of attention. She stood up. Vesa Holt was back. And she had not come alone. Alara heard footsteps in the entrance hall, multiple sets, too many to be just the 2 people she had seen arrive. She heard Helen's voice, and then another voice she did not know, and then Vesa's, and the sound of it was different from the last time she had been here. It was not the smooth certainty of someone making a social call. It was the sound of someone who had decided that this visit was going to be something the house would remember. Alara set down her cloth. She went to the top of the main staircase and looked down. There were 6 people in the entrance hall. Vesa and the man from her first visit, and 4 others she had not seen before. 3 men and 1 woman, all of them carrying themselves in the particular way that all the people in this house carried themselves when they were serious about something. The way of people who did not pretend. Vesa was standing at the center of the group, her coat still on, looking at Helen with an expression that was the most openly determined thing Alara had seen since arriving at Blackwood Manor. She was saying something too low to hear from the top of the stairs. Helen was saying something back, her hands folded, her face giving nothing away. Alara looked for Damien. He was not in the hall. She went back down the corridor and took the back stairs and came out on the ground floor near the study. She moved quickly and quietly. Arrow was at her heels. The study door was open. He was not in the study. She went to the library. Not there either. She went to the corridor that ran alongside the east wing, and there, at the far end, Near the door that was always closed, Damien was standing with Kane, who had apparently arrived at some point Alara had not noticed, and they were speaking in low, urgent voices. She stopped. Kane saw her first. He said something to Damien. Damien turned. He looked at her. Just for a second his face did something that was not the professional blankness. "You should stay in the staff wing," he said. "What is happening?" she said. Kane said, "Vesa has brought a challenge party. She is invoking a pack right to formally contest." He stopped. "To contest what?" she said. Damien said, "Kane." Kane was quiet. She looked at Damien. "To contest what?" He held her gaze. "To contest my acknowledgement of a mate bond that she considers illegitimate," he said, "on the grounds that the person in question is not pack." She stood with this. "She thinks I am fully human," Alara said. "She did not know about your bloodline," Kane said. "She still does not." "And if she did," Alara said. Kane looked at Damien. Damien looked at the door at the end of the corridor. "If she knew," Damien said, "the challenge would collapse. The pack right she is invoking only applies when the mate bond is with someone entirely outside the wolf world. If your bloodline is confirmed." He paused. "There is no ground to stand on." She looked at him. "Then confirm it," she said. He turned to look at her. She said, "Bring Mira. Let her tell them about the Voss line. Let the pack hear it." He was very still. "Ilara," he said. "That means standing in front of 6 wolves, who have come here specifically prepared to argue that you do not belong here. It means—" "I know what it means," she said. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the controlled blankness, not the careful distance. Something much more open, something that looked, in the quiet of the corridor with the winter light coming through the far window, almost like relief that he had not let himself feel yet. "Are you certain?" he said. "Yes," she said. "You do not have to," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." He looked at her for a long moment. He turned to Kane. "Get Mira," he said. Kane went. They stood in the corridor, Ilara and Damien, 3 feet apart. Arrow sitting between them, looking at nothing in particular with his yellow eyes. "Are you frightened?" Damien said. "No," she said. He looked at her. "All right," he said. Not arguing. Not surprised either. Mira appeared at the end of the corridor 3 minutes later, moving with the steady deliberateness of someone who has been ready for this for a long time. She looked at Alara, and then at Damien, and then at the door to the east corridor. "It is time," she said, not as a question. "Yes," Alara said. They went to the entrance hall together. The 6 people who had arrived with Vesa were arranged in the hall in a way that was very deliberate. Not threatening, not aggressive in any visible way, but constructed to communicate. "We are here with purpose, and we will be heard." Vesa was at the center. She looked at Alara the moment she appeared. Something moved across her face, a flicker of surprise, quickly shut away. She had not expected Alara to come into the hall. She had expected to have this conversation with Damien alone. Damien walked to the center of the hall. He did not look at Vesa. He looked at the group as a whole. "You invoked a pack right," he said. "You have the floor." Vesa said what she had come to say. Ilara listened. It was a careful, measured statement, the kind that had been prepared in advance, not improvised. She spoke about the mate bond, about the responsibility of an alpha to the pack's bloodline and standing, about the precedent of a century of ironclad pack tradition. She was not wrong, technically, about the tradition she cited. She was not wrong about the pack right she was invoking. She was only wrong about one thing. She thought Alara was human. When Vesa finished, the hall was quiet. Damien said, "Mira." Mira stepped forward. She was not large or loud or physically imposing. She was a woman of 70, with white close-cropped hair and gray eyes, and when she spoke at the same volume she always used, steady and unhurried and completely certain. She told them about the Voss line. She told it the way she had told it to Alara, not as argument, not as justification, but as history, as simple fact. The bloodline, its origin, its 3-generation dormancy, its symbol, its signs. She spoke the old words that carried weight in a room full of wolves, and she spoke them with the authority of someone who had been the keeper of pack history, since before most of the people in the room were born. When she finished, she reached out and lifted the locket from Alara's collar and held it toward the group. The 6 people who had come with Vesa looked at it. The hall was very quiet. One of the men, older than the others with close gray hair, stepped forward. He looked at the locket. He looked at Mira. He looked at Alara. He said something in a low voice that Alara did not fully catch. Mira said, "Yes." He stepped back. The woman among the group was looking at Alara with an expression that had shifted entirely from the one she had arrived with. She was looking at Alara the way people look at things that rearrange what they thought they knew. Vesa was very still. She was looking at the locket. Alara watched her. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel anger. She felt something quieter and more solid than either of those things. She felt like herself, fully, standing in a hall full of people who were in the process of understanding something that had been true since before she arrived. Vesa looked at Alara. Her face was controlled, but her eyes were not. She said nothing. She looked at Damien. He met her gaze. Something passed between them that Alara did not try to interpret. It was not hers to interpret. It was the residue of years and history, and a grief he had carried, and a misunderstanding she had built her hopes around. And then Vesa looked at the floor. She said, very quietly, "I was not informed." "No," Damien said. "You were not." Another pause. Vesa said, "I invoke my right to withdraw the challenge." The older gray-haired man nodded. And that was it. It was over in the way that formal things end, not with drama, but with a particular kind of quiet, that is the quiet of something that has been settled and will not be unsettled. The 6 people left, not in a hurry, not humiliated, formally, as they had arrived. Vesa was last through the door. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at Alara. Only at Alara, not at Damien, not at Mira. And her expression had in it a complexity that Alara did not try to simplify. She nodded, once, and walked out. The front door closed. The hall was very quiet. Helen made a sound that was not a word. Owen, who had appeared at some point without Alara noticing, and was standing near the back of the hall, went back down the corridor without a word. Lily let out a long, slow breath. Mira put the locket back against Alara's collar, carefully, and patted her once on the shoulder. Damien was looking at the front door. He turned. He looked at Alara across the hall. She looked back at him. There were other people in the room, and neither of them cared about that in this particular moment. They stood in the entrance hall of Blackwood Manor, with 7 rose blooms behind them, and Arrow sitting patiently at the foot of the stairs, and they looked at each other with the specific clarity that comes after something large has resolved. He said, very quietly, "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. He held her gaze. "Thank you," he said. She shook her head slightly. "You do not need to thank me for standing in my own place," she said. He looked at her for a long, still moment. "No," he said, "I don't." The morning after the challenge was the coldest morning yet. Alara woke to the sound of wind against the window, and found Arrow already standing at the foot of the bed, looking at her with his morning expression, which was the expression of someone who had been patient for a very long time, and felt this was an appropriate moment to acknowledge it. She got up. The frost on the garden below was thick and white and completely even, like a covering laid down carefully in the night. She stood at the window for a moment and looked at it. The line of green shoots along the south wall had not retreated into the cold. They were still there. Some of them had small, tight buds. In December. She dressed and went downstairs. The staff kitchen was warm. Lily was at the kettle, and Owen was reading his newspaper, and Helen was making notes at the end of the table. And for a moment, Alara stood in the doorway and looked at the 3 of them, and felt something she did not always let herself feel, something that needed a steady surface under it to stay standing. She felt like she had come home. Not the feeling of arriving somewhere you have always known. The feeling of arriving somewhere you did not know you were headed, and finding that everything in you says, "This is it. This is the thing you were looking for." She sat down. Helen said, without looking up from her notes, "Mr. Blackwood would like to speak with you this morning, after 9. Lily looked at Alara over her teacup with an expression that communicated a great deal in a very small space. "All right," Alara said. Owen turned a page. She ate her toast. She drank her tea. She went upstairs and started her morning work, and moved through the upper corridor and the guest rooms with her usual care. She was not distracted. She was, if anything, more focused than usual. The particular focus that comes from a mind that has settled its largest questions and has freed up space for everything else. At 9:05, she went downstairs. She knocked on the study door in the way she had learned, the press and wait. "Come in," he said. He was standing at the window, not at the desk. The winter light came through it flat and clear, and made the room very sharp. He was looking out at the garden when she entered, and he turned when she came in. He looked at her. She had been looked at by this man many times now, briefly, carefully, directly, at a distance. She had catalogued without meaning to the many kinds of looking he did, the way you catalogue things in a place you have decided matters. This one was different. This one did not have any of the management in it. The careful control that usually lived behind his eyes was present, but it was not working to contain anything. It was simply there, the way a hand on a railing is simply there, steadying, not blocking. He said, "How are you this morning?" "Good," she said. "The frost is impressive." Something almost smiled in the corner of his mouth. "It is," he said. A pause. He said, "I want to talk about yesterday." She waited. "You came into that hall," he said. "I told you to stay in the staff wing." "You suggested it," she said. "You did not direct it." "No," he said, "I didn't." "Why not?" she said. He looked at her. "Because I was not certain I had the right to," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "What Kane said," she said. When he stopped himself, he was going to say that Vesa was contesting your acknowledgement of a mate bond. "Yes," he said. "You acknowledged it," she said. "Formally." He was very still. "Not formally," he said. "Not yet. But in a way that Kane could see, and Mira could see, and apparently Vesa's network of information could see." A pause. "I was not hiding it." She stood in the study in the December light, and looked at this man, this careful, guarded, deeply serious man, who had spent 5 years behind a wall he had built from grief and guilt and the need to keep everything intact. And she thought about the journey of the last 2 months. The staircase, the corridor, the library, the kitchen at midnight, the green book, the linen room, the conversation through a closed door. She said, "I need to ask you something." "Yes," he said. "What do you want?" she said. "Not the wolf, not the bond. You, Damien Blackwood, what do you want?" He was quiet for a long time. She waited. She was a person who could wait. She had learned that about herself. He said, "I want to stop living inside a house I have been living outside of for 5 years." She looked at him. "I want," he stopped, started again. "I want the feeling I have in this house now, to be the feeling of the rest of my life. The feeling that has been here since you arrived, the one that," he paused, "the one that made the library a room I go to in the mornings again. The one that made the roses bloom. The one that made my wolf stop being the only part of me that was fully awake." She was quiet. "That is what I want," he said. She crossed the room. Not toward him, not directly. She went to the window beside him, and she stood beside him, and they were both looking out at the white frost garden and the green shoots along the south wall that had no business being green in December. "I want to keep learning what I am," she said. "I want Mira to keep telling me. I want Arrow to sleep at the foot of the bed and follow me through the house." She paused. "I want the library in the mornings, and I want to keep replacing books exactly where I found them." She paused again. "And I want to stop pretending that the feeling in this house is only about the house." He was very still beside her. "What else is it about?" he said. She turned. He was looking at her. Not from a distance. From right here, beside her, in the flat December light. She said, "You know what it is about." "I know what my wolf says," he said. "I am asking what you say." She looked at him. "I say," she said, "that I have been home before in small ways, in certain rooms, certain books, certain good mornings, but I have never been home in the largest way. Not until I walked up this drive with a bag over my shoulder and stepped through that door." She paused. "I am not saying I was looking for you specifically. I did not know you existed, but I was looking for somewhere that would hold me properly. And this place does, and you are part of this place. He was looking at her with an expression that was completely unguarded for the first time in all the times she had seen his face. He said, I have not let anything new into my life in 5 years. I know, she said. I am still afraid of what that cost last time, he said. I know, she said. And I am telling you that anyway, he said. Because you ask me not to manage what I say to you, and this is what is true. She looked at him. She said, I am not Clara. No, he said. You are not. And I am not asking you to pretend she didn't exist, she said, or that what happened didn't happen, or that the guilt goes away because I am here. It doesn't, he said. It is still there. I know, she said. I am not here to fix that. I am here to be here, alongside whatever else is here. He looked at her for a very long moment. Then he reached out his hand. Not toward her. He held it out, open, palm up, between them. The simplest possible thing. She looked at his hand. She thought about Arrow putting his chin in her palm that first time. The simple wisdom of saying, you are safe and I know it, and here is my proof. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around it. Not tightly. Just enough. They stood at the window in the cold December light and looked at the garden together, and the frost was thick and white, and the shoots along the south wall were green and impossibly alive, and Arrow scratched at the study door from the outside, once, and then was quiet. They stood there for a long time. She thought, this is not a beginning. A beginning would be smaller than this. This is something that has been going on for longer than either of them knew, finally being allowed to be what it already is. He said, quietly, I should tell you. The East Wing. I would like to open it. She looked at him. When you're ready, she said. I think I am ready, he said. I think I have been ready for a while, and did not let myself know it. She looked at their joined hands. His was larger and steadier than hers. Hers was warm from the work she had been doing all morning. Whenever you choose, she said. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt in the thin winter sun, running in small clear streams down the stone walls of the garden. The green shoots along the south wall held their buds tightly, waiting for a warmth that was still some time away. But they held. That was the thing. They held. 3 months later, the snow came. It came on a night in March that had been showing signs of it all day, a particular quality to the sky, a weight in the air, the way the forest beyond the garden went very quiet in the afternoon, quieter than usual, the way forests do when they know something is coming. Elara noticed it from the library window, and did not say anything to anyone, only noted it, and went back to the shelf she was working on. By midnight, 3 inches covered the drive. By morning, the garden was white and completely still. She stood at her window with Arrow at her feet and looked out at it and thought, I have been here nearly 5 months, and the house has gone from autumn to winter to something that feels like the pause before spring. A great deal had changed in 3 months. The East Wing was open. Damien had opened it himself, on a Saturday morning in early January, with no ceremony. He had simply walked to the door at the end of the east corridor, put his key in it, and pushed it open. He had stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he had walked through. Elara had not been with him. She had been in the library. He had told her afterward, briefly, in the way he told her things, directly, without performance. He said it had not been as difficult as he had expected. He said the room was only a room. He said he had stood in it for 10 minutes, and felt the grief sitting where it always sat, and then he had opened the windows. She had not asked what that meant. She understood. The East Wing was not entirely open to the house. Some of it remained private, as it should be, but the closed, heavy weight of it had lifted. The corridor was no longer off limits. Helen had begun cleaning certain rooms in it again. The fireplace that Owen had been quietly tending from the far end was now tended properly. The house breathed differently. She felt it every morning. Kane came to the house often now. He and Elara had developed a relationship that was not warm in the obvious sense but was solid in the way that mattered, the way of two people who have been honest with each other early and found the honesty workable. He called her Miss Cole. She called him Kane, because he had told her to on his 3rd visit after January, and she trusted people who said what they meant. He had told her, on one of those visits, that the pack had settled. Not entirely, not all of them, But the center had held, and the edges were following. Mira's testimony about the Voss bloodline had done what Mira had known it would do. It had given the pack something they could hold on to, a framework, a history. Pack people trusted history more than they trusted feeling, he said. Feeling changed. History had already happened. Alara had thought about that and decided it was both true and not quite complete, and she and Kane had a conversation about it that lasted nearly an hour, and ended with him saying he would think about it, and her saying she expected he would. Lily had reacted to the news about the bloodline in the way Lily reacted to most things, with an open heart and no pretense of having known all along, even though she had suspected. I knew there was something, she said. The roses, the way Arrow looked at you the first day. She had paused, and then added, with perfect sincerity, I'm very glad you found your way here. Owen had said nothing. He had simply, at some point in January, begun leaving the library fireplace, laid and ready on mornings, when he knew Alara would be working in there, so that she only needed to light it rather than lay it. She had noticed this immediately. She had not said anything to him about it. He had not mentioned it. It was the way Owen showed things. And Damien. Damien was becoming more present. That was the only word she had found for it, because it was not transformation. He was the same person, had always been the same person, the same direct, serious, guarded man with the wolf in him that had known before his mind did. He had not changed into something different. He was allowing more of himself to be present. The way a room that has been kept dark will show more of itself when someone finally opens the curtains. Not a new room, only the same room, fully seen. He came to the library every morning now. He sat in the other chair and read or worked, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they did not. She did not feel the need to fill the silence, and neither did he, which was one of the things she had put on the list in her notebook under what I know, that she had found someone whose quiet felt like company. He had learned her preferences quietly, without making a production of it. He knew she liked the fire lit before she came in, and that she preferred to make her own tea. He knew she would tell him when she needed something, and would not expect him to anticipate. He knew she would tell him the truth, even when the truth was inconvenient, and she had seen what that meant to him, which was everything. She had learned that he needed the morning to be quiet before he could deal with anything complex, that he was not a person who apologized easily, but who corrected course without being asked when he saw he had been wrong, that the grief about Clara was still there, some days heavier than others, and that on those days, the best thing she could do was be steady and present, and not try to fix a thing that was not hers to fix. On a morning in February, he had told her something she had not known. He had said, Clara would have liked you. She had looked at him. He had said, she was a reader. She would have wanted to know you, and she would have wanted this, for me, and I have spent 5 years not believing that, because it was easier than the alternative. She had said, what was the alternative? He had said, actually choosing to be here, in my own life. She had looked at him. She had said, you are here now. He had said, very quietly, yes. The snow in March continued to fall through the morning. By noon it had stopped, and the garden was white and thick and very bright under the pale sun that had come out after. Alara finished her morning work and put on her coat and went outside, the first time she had been outside in several days because the cold had been severe. Arrow came with her, delighted in the way only small creatures who have never seen deep snow can be, bounding in a way that was entirely impractical and completely sincere. She laughed at him, which was a sound that came easily now, which was something she noticed. She walked to the south wall. The green shoots were gone under the snow, but the snow was not heavy, and the buds were there, pressing against it from beneath, still intact, still holding. She swept the snow back gently from one of them with her hand. The bud was firm and tightly closed and dark green, and it was very much alive. She heard footsteps on the garden path behind her. She did not turn immediately. She knew the footsteps. He came and stood beside her, looking at the wall. You found them, he said. They are holding, she said. He looked at the bud she had uncovered. What are they? I'm not sure, she said. They have been growing since November. I have not wanted to disturb them to see. He crouched down and looked at the bud closely. Snowdrops, he said. There were snowdrops here when I was a child. They used to come back every year, and then they stopped. about 15 years ago. She looked at the wall. They are coming back, she said. He stood. He was close. Winter coat close. The distance that is simply practical when two people are looking at the same small thing. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold. He said, "The pack is gathering in 2 weeks. The spring gathering. I would like you to come." She looked at him. He said, "Not as staff, as," he paused. "As," she said. He looked at her with that clear, direct look that she had come to know as his truest one. "As yourself," he said. "Fully, as who you are in this house, and what your blood is, and what we are to each other." A pause. "I would like to introduce you, by name, without rank or title, because you are a person before you are anything else, and I want to say your name, and have the pack know that is enough." She stood in the snow in the March garden, with Arrow bumbling around her feet, and the snowdrop buds holding against the white and the winter sun very bright above them. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right," she said again. "Yes." His hand found hers at her side. He did not look down at it. She did not look down at it. They stood in the garden and looked at the wall and the snow and the very clear sky. "Spring is late this year," he said. "It's coming," she said. Arrow barked at nothing in particular and went bounding into the untouched snow near the far wall, impractically, happily, with total conviction. She watched him. She felt Damien's thumb move against her hand, once, a small deliberate thing. She pressed back. The garden was white and cold, and the snowdrops were holding, and the forest beyond the wall was very quiet, and the sky above them was pale and open and wide, and she stood in the middle of all of it and thought, "Here. This is it. Not the place I was looking for. The place I am." The spring gathering was 2 weeks away, but spring was already in the walls of Blackwood Manor, in the way that all real things are present before they are announced. Quietly, steadily, in the smallest signs, holding on. In the entrance hall, 8 rose blooms. In the library, 2 chairs, both used. In the laundry room, a worn blanket in a corner that belonged to a wolf, who slept better at the foot of a bed. In the east wing, windows that opened every morning for the first time in 5 years. And in the garden, snowdrops in March, under the snow, holding, always holding.